Kentish knock. 'Tis the battle of Kentish knock. Hello everyone, how are we doing? Today is a fun day of naval history because it's the Battle of Kentish Knock, which takes place on the 8th of October, 1652. According to the Gregorian calendar. It's the 28th of September, 1652, according to the Julian calendar. I do like to confuse you all. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, Dan Freeman. Hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, Graham Highlander. Hello, M35 Benvids. Hello, Boreas Real. Ooh, good. You'll be actually able to catch this live once. I'm glad. Hello, Vice Admiral Nelson. Appropriate you're here. Seeing as the admiral in charge of the British fleet was the person who Nelson modelled himself on. Hello, Albazaski. Hello, Greg Stadowski. Hello, Seneca Nero. Hello, Teamy Locker. Hello, DG40. Hello, Jess P. Hello, Calvin Gesberg. And hello, Peter Dawson. A Gregorian chant. A little bit of an attempt at one. Hello, Vision. So, how are we all doing? I hope we're well. I'm having a fun week. IT has been interesting. The world has been interesting. And honestly, the fact that this is on my Friday night is both testimony to my social life and also testimony to the fact that you lot are a lot more fun than my social life. Hello, Nook. Seeing as most of my social life tends to involve the gym. Hello, John Hargreaves. So, I have a 2-litre bottle of Iron Brew and a date tomorrow with both a flu jab and, this is something fun coming up for you all, a book review with a difference. This book review, for some reason for this review, me and Drac have decided to do something together. So, watch the space. Plus, there'll be a little bit of an update as to the progress of the patron vote at the end. Vision. So the Dutch Navy was a little bit like the Trade Federation. A little bit. In fact, before I get into this, I am going to read one of the interesting passages from Nicholas Rogers' book. So this is from The Command of the Ocean. Now, this is interesting because it does have an idea of what it thinks the Battle of Shetland is, but it has a different account of it than everyone else as well does. As tension rose between the two countries during 1651, and the Dutch diplomats in London strove to negotiate a settlement of the commercial issues surrounding the Navigation Act, the States General voted to increase the Dutch fleet by no less than 150 ships, making a total of 226. Proud of their status as the world's leading maritime power, they confidently expected to intimidate the Commonwealth. Instead, they achieved the worst possible result, convincing the English that they were intent on war. By a measure which the Admiralties were incapable of carrying into effect with speed, even though many of the new ships were taken up from trade. The Republican regents who now controlled Dutch policy were confident that the sort of navy and strategy which had served them so well in the past would suffice to keep trade flowing even if the English forced a war. This was rash, but the strategic situation of England was vastly more dangerous than that in Spain's been. English observers like Captain Nicholas Foster of the Phoenix were frankly astonished that a States General should risk a naval war, when, like an eagle's wings extend over her body, our coast surrounded theirs for 120 leagues from Sicily to Mass in Holland one way, and as many from Orcadas thither the other way, and the wind blowing above 3/4 of the year westerly on the coast of England, made all our cape lands and bays very good roads for ships to anchor at. Most Dutch trade routes passed close by English shores, and the Republic, or at least Holland, its paymaster, was completely dependent on seaborne trade for food and livelihood. England, by contrast, was self-sufficient in food and had limited overseas trade. In the gloomy words of Adrian Pauw, Raad Pensionaris of Holland and one of the Dutch diplomats in London, the English are going to attack a mountain of gold. We have to face one of iron. This is one of those scenarios where, frankly, the battle, the war, all of it is interesting. But there are times in history when, honestly, as far as each side are concerned, the other sides are Klingons. They don't understand them at all. They have no reference or framework. And I'm not talking about Klingons as in the Next Generation Klingons or the Deep Space Nine Klingons. I'm talking the First Generation Klingons, where they basically would, any chance they got, go to war. That is the reality. The Dutch are talking one language, the English are talking another. And we'll be getting into that. But you can look at it repeats in history. Germany, prior to World War One, their whole psychology of their risk fleet is kind of akin to the Dutch psychology of building their massive fleet. They presume the other side is going to accept it because they are who they are. It's Japan as well. We like to sometimes kid ourselves in history. We put forward events and go, oh, this is unique, that they've had this sort of thinking and thought process, and or it's unique to Germany in the in the early 1900s that they have this happen twice to them, or it's not. It's not. All nations, all groups of humans, all groups of beings, as far as we understand them, can be guilty of groupthink, and groupthink going wrong. It can go right, it can go wrong. Okay? Sometimes the best science can be ignored, or the best evidence in front of you can be ignored because all the people around you say differently. One of the interesting things in this period is you have actually small wars with France during the Protectorate. But the French really seem to understand that the Commonwealth they're facing, the English, are not the same kind of enemies who they've traditionally fought. In many ways, this is a new birth of a new military power. And I often argue that rather than Henry VIII or all the other points of history, which we date the Royal Navy back and the Armada and during Queen Elizabeth's reign, etc., we need to start dating our Navy back to Cromwell, to the Protectorate. Because it's only then that you start to get the mindset seeping into British troops, which, to be fair, they'd had a fair number of British English troops had during the 100 Years' War. That losing a battle doesn't mean you've lost the war. That you keep fighting till you win the war. And this is the problem for the Dutch with this war, because they are so used to winning versus the Spanish, but they're forgetting two things. One, normally the British, the English at least, are beneficent and neutrals when they're fighting the Spanish, rather than the base of operations. And two, much more important, the English have nothing to lose at this point. They are a pariah amongst nations. The only nation they could claim particular fraternity with was the Dutch. That's the only fellow republic they can really look to. A Protestant, Calvinist republic. And the trouble is, they are both speaking Klingon as far as the other's concerned. Hello, Knight 6831. Never ever heard of this battle. You won't have, but it's one of Blake's battles, so it's a good one. Hello, Jack Ray. Graham Hamlet, you wouldn't be overpopular with the Admiral of that fleet if you chanted. They might make you dance a tad whilst on the fire. Oh, I'm fairly sure we could all have fun. Night 6, I know I forgot to do the correction from episode 66. I apologize. Most profusely. I didn't mean to do that, and I forgot. I do apologize. Seneca, you and Drac, as well as Battleship New Jersey, put out so much content I can never catch up between all the chapel uploads, lives, and bilge pumps and armchair animals. And I should warn you, Jamie's going to be putting out a whole load soon, and that you'll hear in the next episode of Bilge Pumps, we have a special being planned. Graham Hunt, there is a little new, just people doing as such. It's complicated. Knight 6 Averin, when when you have nothing left to lose is when you're the most dangerous. Hi, Graham Hanlon, Calvinist modern Protestant doc. I know, and hence I did emphasize the Calvinist point. Now, Calvin Gaswood, Sweden just checked. Sweden counts as Lutheran Protestant since 1593. Yeah. That's good. Lutheran Protestant. Not Calvinist. There is a slight difference. A slight difference. And just as a heads up, the reason this is up here is, of course, as many of my regulars hopefully know, but as anyone who's a new viewer won't, I currently have a bet going with my aunt, which is if I can get to 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st, 2021, she and my uncle will take a picture of themselves wearing Blackburn face masks, which would be really quite funny. This came about because of much demanding for Blackburn merchandise and various other things. I'm still slightly worried that some of you have formed two religions based on airplanes from this channel. But leaving that to one side, I did bow to pressure and set up a merchandise stream on Spreadshirt, this store. And when my aunt saw it, she saw the Blackburn face masks, and hence the bet was born. So if I get to 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st, 2021, she'll be wearing them. Fun times. Anyway, the First Anglo-Dutch War. It's... As said already, it's one of those wars which you really find kind of strange how it happens. In fact, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and I'm going to read again from Nicholas Rogers here, and then I'm probably going to put this book down and ignore it for the rest of the time, because honestly, it's not that great when it comes to the battle. He tries, definitely, but it's not that great. But he does have a good explanation here. And this is it. The final trigger for the outbreak of war was provided by the long-standing English claim to be saluted everywhere in the undefined British seas in acknowledgement of English sovereignty. This ambitious, not to say absurd, claim had long been a source of trouble with other nations, but hitherto the States General had avoided it by instructing their officers to yield to the salute on the understanding that it was a courtesy, not an acknowledgement of any legal jurisdiction. Confident of their superiority, they chose this moment to give Trump orders which were both stiffer in tone and vaguer in meaning. He was to yield to salute if the English forces were stronger, so long as the state shall not be trifled with. Trump was not by nature rash or provocative, but Such orders were fatal in a period of high tension when the exact form of the salute was unsure. On 19th of May 1652, Tromp and Blake met off Dover, and firing broke out over the issue of the salute. Though the facts were confused and disputed, it seems almost certain that Blake fired first. Blake said he fired first. The various British, the Cromwell government said he fired first. The Dutch say he's fired first. I'm really not going to question here whether or not Blake fired first. Although greatly outnumbered, the English ships held their own in a confused action and took 2 Dutch prizes. Even after the Battle of Dover, Tromp remained conciliatory, and the Dutch hoped to avoid war. But the English were enraged at what they regarded as a treacherous attack, and war was formally declared on the 8th of July. Now, before people start accusing Tromp of cowardice or various other things, which I know various Dutch sources did, and that's why he ended up losing his post after the mysterious Battle of the Shetland Islands, let me explain something. Tromp actually tries to explain to his politicians what he's dealing with. In a note of April 1652, he argued a Dutch fleet would have to be concentrated against the English fleet rather than dispersed to escort convoys. Moreover, there was a significant difference between the two navies. The English fleet, which had fought the civil wars, was in composition similar to the Dutch. It was a navy run by merchants, for merchants, and largely made up of armed merchant ships. The Commonwealth had inherited, however, the core of Charles I's ship money fleet of the 1630s, a force of great ships which had no Dutch counterparts. Tromp's flagship, the Brederode, was the only ship in the Dutch fleet of over 50 guns. There were 14 English ships with more, and taking account of the heavy caliber of English guns, he reckoned that there were 50 English ships more powerful than his own. This is the problem for the Dutch, fighting the English. Again, the English can build bigger, tougher ships than the Dutch because of our harbours, because of our ports. That's their advantage. So, poor Adrianus Poor, who have you already heard a little bit of a quote from, he's one of these people sent across by the Dutch Republic to try and produce a peace. And what's interesting is many of these problems can be traced back to the Commonwealth offering a more strict and intimate allegiance and union with the Republic that was to be created by what was described as a confederation of the 2 Commonwealths. Pretty much the Commonwealth, the English Commonwealth, at certain points it becomes a union of the 2, of England and Scotland, offers to form one country with the Netherlands. Now, we can think about that as an interesting turning point, because if that had happened and they had become one country, well, a lot of the course of history could be very interesting. But leaving that to one side, for some reason, the Dutch didn't like that idea. Mainly because it came, well, let's put it on way, their stadtholders and various other posts didn't like the idea that it would probably come with a Cromwellian Lord Protector, as in Lord Protector Cromwell. Probably having charge, but it would have come with the new model army, which the French would have even hated even more, because let's be honest, if the new model army had been landed in the Netherlands and combined with the Dutch, then there would have been a very short repeat of at least the glorious, the first portion of the 100 Years' War. Now, there weren't many armies in Europe at that time who came anywhere close to the efficiency and organisation of the new model army, especially not with its adherence to promotion by capability. That kind of gave them an advantage. So, but the Dutch didn't want that. And they decide to negotiate from strength, as said, and they order 150 merchant ships to be made ready. I'm not sure why. You're already having negotiations with this nation across the way from you. You're an island nation, and your main beef with them has been the fact that they've been continuing to supply and trade with royalist colonies around the world rather than desisting as you've requested. And you expect, because they are fellow Calvinists, they are fellow Republicans ish, them to be on your side. You can sort of see why the Rump Parliament at this point were feeling. How should I put this? Disillusioned? It is the problem when you get foreign policy made by people who, to many ways, have been brought together by ideology. It might be a religious worldview. It might. There are many things you can say which formed the parliamentary coalition, which ended up fighting the civil war in Britain and doing all that. But you can broadly say there is a religious ideology as part of it. And the trouble is they bring that ideology especially to the beginning of their foreign policy. Cromwell especially takes a while before his political and his pragmatic experience starts to blend into his foreign policy. For some reason, he thought that states would act, and people who ran states would act more mature than the parliamentarians who he'd regularly had to chide. He soon realised that actually, in many ways, the parliamentarians he'd had to chide were mere children compared to the full-blown tantrums he had to deal with on the foreign policy stage. Hello, Stafford Thompson. Anyway, 9601. Who haven't the British not force in a war? I'm sure there are a couple of countries, but for the life of me, I can't remember their names at the moment. I don't think we've actually. Hang on, no. You see, the trouble is, I'm including probably mentally my definition. Who haven't we had incidents with as well? And once you include incidents, the number of countries which we haven't fired on goes very, very low. Because we were a major power in a period, well, still are arguably a major power in relative to a state of nations in the world, but we were a major power in a period of the world where you did fire your guns slightly more frequently. So, yeah, that becomes a complicated one. Graham Hanley, if you don't fire first, you generally lose. That's true. I do notice that there is a lot of Star Wars going on here, and I do warn you all, I have seen the votes, and I'll be talking about the numbers coming in for the patron choice later. Boris Hill, is this the war where the Dutch play Grand Theft Warship to Croakdrack? No, that's a later Anglo-Dutch war. This is the first one. I think that is the second one, Steve. Come on, Carl van Gasford, Raid on the Medway, 1667. Yeah, that's the second war. So they hated Oliver Cromwell. No, the Dutch didn't hate him. They were petrified of him. They would never admit that, but honestly, Cromwell was a very scary figure in Europe at this period. Because to their minds, despite the fact he'd had a thoroughly middle-class upbringing and was thoroughly middle-class, to their minds, he'd risen from the bottom to the very top. Not by being an economic merchant and growing rich, which they could to an extent accept, as that was the model for the Netherlands and Venice and a few other places. No. by war, by leadership of an army, by being a regicide and killing a king. Remember, these vaunted Republicans in the Dutch Republic didn't actually kill William III's father. He just happened to die, and William III was a baby, so they managed to use the power vacuum to step up. Actually committing regicide, that's scary. Medway was, I think, the second Anglo-Dutch War, or maybe the third. I think it was the second. So here is the Dutch Republic, or otherwise known as the United Provinces. It's a rather interesting thing. For starters, you have 8 areas, 8 provinces, but only 7 of them provide people to the States General. Those are the Duchy of Guelders, the County of Holland, County of Zeeland, Lordship of Utrecht, Lordship of Overijssel, Lordship of Friese, and Lordship of Groningen. Now, please note it's kind of interesting because about 2 of these provide the majority of the Admiralties, but we'll get to that ones in a next slide. What is most interesting to me always when I'm talking about the Dutch Republic, and this is the point at which I usually turn around to students and I turn one of the things they've often heard on their heads, because I go, the County of Drenthe, it's so poor it doesn't have to pay taxes. But because it doesn't pay taxes, it doesn't have representation in the States General. So basically, no taxation without representation, as the American chant was at... The chant was that started off the American War of Independence and all these things in Philadelphia. But, and this is various points to think about, they get no representation because they have no taxation. So they have no input on decisions to go to war. And as such, their areas are often the ones which anything gets ravaged, it tends to be Drenthe. And if you look up, you can see Drenthe on here quite clearly. It's the green area around Assen. So it's the only part without a coastline. And it's the poorest. Seneca. So after the Third Anglo-Dutch War, the Glorious Revolution happens, basically a successful Dutch invasion of England. Basically, eventually the Dutch and the English do combine. Eric Kaufman, South Americans? No, we've had incidents with most of them at different points. Portuguese, Boris Real, the Portuguese, possibly. Again, there have been some incidents off the coast of Brazil during the time of Elizabeth, etc. The Swiss, Team Locker, the Swiss. No, we've had issues with the Swiss. Hello, Dutch Squad. Good evening. Had a rubbish for this week this week. So hopefully an engaging evening of naval history with opportunity for innuendo will brighten things up a bit. Oh, not too much in man. Eric Kaufman, Poland. The thing is, we've had issues with Poland when it hasn't been Poland. Seneca, Papal States of Anarchy. No, no, we've had issues with them. Oh yeah, we have. Oh. And as Dan Freeman points, the Dutch invasion of England was less peaceful in Scotland Island. Hello, Rowan Cash. Colin Cameron. Poland fought for Napoleon, so no, yeah, that was an issue there. 96831. What caused the Commonwealth of England to collapse in 1660? Did the Anglo-Dutch Wars contribute to it? No. What caused the Commonwealth of England to collapse was the death of Cromwell. The thing is, if Cromwell had survived another decade, there had been a worthy successor who had been able to take on the Lord Protectorate other than his son, which was chosen, but if they'd continued the choice by merit and either gone with Albemarle or potentially, well, if he'd been alive, they might well have gone, interestingly enough, they might. Let me just make sure I get my right. They might well have gone with Blake if he'd been alive. For some reason I wanted to call him Bake and knew that wasn't right. Cromwell does good. Actually, here's the interesting thing. Cromwell doesn't actually lead the coup for much of the time. He just is the one in the end who's the most powerful at the end of it. He's not the one who leads it. It's kind of a how do I put this? Assassination of Caesar thing. In that there are lots of hands on the blades which take out Caesar, but very few of those hands end up profiting at the end. As Walt92 has just said, the 7th Provincian. Well, yes. And as you can see, the 8th one doesn't get any count because it doesn't pay taxes. Seneca, no taxation without representation, and no representation without taxation. Colin Cameron, UK did not go to war with Malta. We were invited in, and Malta asked to be in the Empire for protection against Italy and the Barbary powers. Quite true. But we have had squabbles with the Knights of St. John prior to that, when they fought on the side of the French. Walt 92. Drenth is mainly moors. Peat mostly. That also describes quite large chunks of Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Seneca, Gelderland, literally moneyland. Discord. Cromwell died, and when he decided that his son should replace him, the few supporters he had before that point decided they'd rather have a Stuart king back. Honestly, actually, Richard wasn't that bad. He just wasn't strong like his father. And to be honest, Cromwell doesn't seem to have really decided that his son should replace him. He thought there should be there should be a selection. That's what some people have argued, or more recent ones. But the fact is, it was presumed the selection was for his son, so people acted as if that's what he intended. Right on. Overseal must be terrible to pronounce for Dr. Clarke. It's let's put it this way. I am pronouncing it as I hope it is, rather than how it's spelt, because that could get me into trouble with YouTube. Eric Calvin, Mongolia. I think we got there as well and caused trouble. Drenth being the poorest because it has no coastline. It gets exempt from taxation, but then no representation, so no hope for coastline, thus remaining poor. Vicious. True. Certainly funny if James II would have become Lord Protector. The thing is, he could have become regent if Charles the Second had had a child. Well, had. had issue to take the throne, but he hadn't, or rather, had legitimate children. Because that's the trouble with Charles II. He has a lot of illegitimate ones. And he acknowledges his illegitimate children. This is the great thing about Charles II. He acknowledges them and goes, yes, you're my child. I don't know. Seriously, Charles II has way too much fun. Him and Genghis Khan. That's good. He didn't start the coup, but he was the one who threatened to have anyone who voted against the election of Charles I killed and had his troops block entry into Parliament. Yeah. But by that point, Charles I had managed to annoy everyone. And honestly, Charles I... Let's put it this way. The British system works when we have smart monarchs. It's the same with the Dutch system. The role of the stadtholder works when they have smart monarchs. When they don't, they have trouble. And that is the problem, really, for the Dutch Republic. When they don't have smart monarchs. So, here is the Admiralties. So you have Rotterdam, otherwise known as Admiralty of the Maas. Originally, the Admiralty for all of Holland. Eventually, just the south of Holland. And then you have the Admiralty of Zeeland, which, as I've said before, I can find... all the other Admiralties, I have a reason for them set up. Rotterdam is set up because, well, the Maas is set up because they are worried about people taking their trade and they want to protect it. The others are mostly set up because the first two Admiralties charge too much money. Zeeland seems to have been set up, I sincerely believe it was set up because a load of merchants in the Zeeland area thought, you know what? Those Rotterdamans, they've come up with a great way to make money, convoying merchant ships. They both get the money from providing the protection, but also because they provide the protection, they get to carry less weapons on their trade ships. So their trade ships can carry more profitable goods. And they're more likely to get those goods home. So they're more likely to get more money. It's just, it's just win-win-win. Let's do it. It's a protection racket with a difference. Then you have the Admiralty of Amsterdam, otherwise known as North Holland, set up by the Earl of Leicester, mainly because they kept squabbling. He comes up with a lot of flowery reasons, but basically, the Earl of Leicester is sent there by Queen Elizabeth to assist the Dutch with their defense against the Spanish. And he gets fed up with having to arbitrate disputes because of people going, oh, they're just focusing on them, or oh, we're based here, but we're having to spend all our time cover them. And in the end, he goes, he doesn't scream, although he might have done. It just hasn't survived. He suggests strongly the setting up of another admiralty. So North Holland gets a second one. So please note, if we go back to this map quickly, there are now 2 in Holland and 1 in Zeeland. Okay? There's North Holland, South Holland, and Zeeland. So you have 3 admiralties. So that takes us all the way up to 1589. When... Now, here's the interesting thing. Technically, the Admiralty of Amsterdam covers East Friesland. Okay? But as it's constitutionally set up, go back here, it does, if you can see Friesland, it doesn't cover the north of Friesland, i.e. anything sort of above Lemberg, and the rest of Amsterdam's coast, of the Dutch coast. And so they're so fed up with paying the money to Amsterdam, they set up the Admiralty of the Noorderwater, otherwise known as the Admiralty of West Friesland, which actually covers North Friesland, but we'll leave that to one side. And this is set up by resolution by Parliament and Maurice of Orange. However, this doesn't cause any peace. No, no, no. There are still disputes over convoy earnings with the Admiralty of Amsterdam between them and the rest of Friesland. So Friesland ends up getting a second one in 1596. And that is how the Dutch end up with 5 admiralties spread over 3 of the 7 provinces. Okay? County of Holland and County of Zeeland, 2 and 1, respectively. And then the Lordship of Friese has 2 more. Those are the admiralties. So when we're talking about the Dutch naval war effort, you're actually not talking about the 7 provinces. You're not talking about the 8 provinces. You're talking about 3 provinces. Because those are the 3 areas which have the direct links to the sea, which is great for them, but it also means the cost isn't borne by the whole state. So there is no involvement, barring some personnel coming across, and occasionally the Stats General supporting it with some extra money, to supporting those admiralties. Those admiralties, especially in peacetime, are kept going by those individual areas, by the merchants in those areas that they are supposed to support, paying money for convoys, etc., which does allow them a consistency of income, but it means they never get much because no merchantman wants to pay them a huge amount of money. Thank you, Roland Cash. Very saucy. James II, something Catholic, something Pepper, something. Yeah, that's why he probably wouldn't have been made Lord Protector. That and a few other things. Colin Cameron, English Revolution, similar to the Russian Revolution, with Cromwell playing the Stalin role, i.e. not the main instigator, but profits the most. No, I would say Cromwell isn't so much Stalin, but more likely Trotsky. It's as if Trotsky gets control rather than Stalin with Cromwell. By Samuel Nelson, yes, the Dutch. Is it true their fleets drew heavily on low German crews? I know their fishing and whaling expeditions did, but not sure for most of their armed forces. To an extent, yes. Shulmac. That's good. The majority of the Commons and all the House of Lords wanted to introduce a constitutional monarchy. Cromwell wanted power. His trial of Charles I was against the will of Parliament, hence why they locked most people out of the Commons and refused to consult laws. Even the trials are fast, nothing more than a usurper desperate of legitimacy. I'm not sure where you've read that, Derp Squad, or where you've got that from, but that's not quite right. In the nicest way, there's a lot more nuance and context, and it wasn't against the will of the vast majority of important lords and important members of Parliament, despite what they might have protested afterwards. You have to remember that after Charles II comes back, a lot of history gets rewritten, and a lot of people suddenly become very sure they were absolutely pro-monarchy the whole way. But you also have to remember that Charles I had been an idiot, an absolute idiot, a cast iron, useless idiot who had managed to muck up everything. The problem was, interesting enough, the problem with Charles I and what happened to him was largely what came next. What do you do next? And they didn't want Charles II because the people were worried after they dealt with Charles I that he might not like them. So they wanted time. Shumac. Ooh, setting up different institutions because nobles can't stop fighting. I can't see how this ends with anything but well. Standing 343. East or West Friesland? West Friesland is actually part of North Holland. Dr. Clarke. I know it's part of, but okay. West Friesland is actually part of North Holland. Turning 343. Yes and no. It gets complicated. It's all fun, but it's basically, broadly speaking, it's part of Friesland. Or Friesland. Please, there is. I have managed to work it out enough to explain it. I can do an entire lecture on the topic and the subject of the Dutch Admiralties, but honestly, that is not one I'm ever doing on YouTube because it's just going to get me a lot of Dutch people being very angry with me for mispronouncing the names. Colin Cameron, so no ship money. Not really. The money the Stats General vote for 150 ships, but trouble is, when you have 5 admiralties which then start competing for resources to try and create those 150 ships, and each get their allotment, it doesn't really make for an efficient or organized process. The greedy could have made a ton more money all around trading in New World and Asia if they had a real federation and stopped squabbling. I would point out that Calvin Gasberg has just pointed out, as with the Ferengi, the bureaucratic machine must be lubricated by latinum. It was interesting. Surely if there's a merchant protection fleet, then that won't lead to balance of fleet engagements? Not really, no. Cody 85. No one wants to pay for a proper navy in peacetime. Sounds like late 9th century US. Any more complicated? Oh, yeah. As Graham Handler has just pointed out, Charles I was never meant to be king. His older brother was. Yes, and his older brother would have probably been smarter. It is an early mince pie, yes. I got given a box of them. Steve with craze. The tulip mania had collapsed, I think, in 1637, so wasn't a problem by this point. But, yeah, that sunk in 1637, the tulip mania. There is an argument it doesn't have a critical influence on the prosperity of the Dutch Republic, but honestly, I would say it does leave them with a legacy of skepticism when it comes to economic matters. That's good. That's good. If I'm wrong, would you mind expanding on how contemporary and modern accounts are fairly clear on the idea that Cromwell rigged a vote in Charles in his favour? Through, probably you're going to say military means. Okay, this is slightly off topic, but it is relevant because it's Cromwell and he's one of the heads of state at this point. And I'm guessing on what your second point is, Dirt Squad. So let me explain about Cromwell. He is... Oh, yeah, so here's a combination of intimidation, bribery, and using his troops to keep those who disagreed with him out of Parliament to ensure votes went his way. Well, there's your first invitation that it's not probably Cromwell in running things. Cromwell doesn't have money and doesn't have that much money and isn't really the type to do bribery. Cromwell tends to prefer slightly more direct means of control. He leads by example with his troops from the front, which is what earns him the respect of the troops. And he does provide the soldiery part of it. And it is him keeping the army together and keeping the army disciplined. And you must remember that Cromwell had been the leading voice, well, one of the leading voices, calling for a constitutional monarchy and a friendship with the king when Charles I had first been captured. But then Charles I escapes, and there's another battle. The conflict goes on again. And more people die. At that point, Cromwell does become really quite convinced that this man is not fit to be king, is not fit to rule them. But no one has any idea about what to do. There is a very interesting cabal running things at this point in the Rump Parliament. They are not centred just on Cromwell. It's far more than just Cromwell. And again, to get into all the people would be a whole different video, but there are a lot more. You also have to remember that the New Model Army, which is always associated with Cromwell, was actually not commanded by Cromwell. It was commanded by Thomas Fairfax. And he's in charge till, well, he's in charge for most of the Civil War. In fact, his last service as Commander-in-Chief was the suppression of the Leghorn Mutiny in 1649. So it gets problematic when you start getting into whether or not it was all on Cromwell. It's like a lot with history, it's very easy to blame it on one person, especially after they're dead and the new person comes in. And so I would say bribery, that comes from different people. His troops, well, they are troops acting under his authority, but they're also Fairfax's troops. And Fairfax is his boss. And he could also give those troops orders if he wanted to. And they would probably have followed Fairfax. It could have been an iffy one, but could have probably got there. And there are also the trained bands, which are in London, which the Lord Mayor could have called up, but doesn't. So there are lots of soldiers in that area, and lots of potential commanders if anyone had really been positive about it. And then it starts to get slightly more complicated even from there. The judges, they're all called, and yes, several of them decide to recruit themselves because quite a lot of the English are motivated by the idea that revolutions tend to go round, and being seen to actually making the conviction would be problematic. So the ones who remain are the ones who are inclined to convict and carry out give the sentence, because that's what they're motivated to do. But then the ones of those who are alive, when Charles II comes back, go, oh, but I was blackmailed, I was intimidated, there were enemy soldiers, there were these parliamentarian soldiers, these Cromwellian soldiers. And it has to be Cromwell because, of course, you can't blame the other army commanders because a couple of them are still alive and in charge of the army at this point, including Monk. So let's be honest, there are lots of officers who are around at this point, and there are lots of people from that ruling party who are in charge, who have the power, who are influencing things. It's not just Cromwell, by a long stretch. There is something at that time, during that time still, the English Council of State. And the English Council of State is an interesting organisation. State. Commonwealth. Let me see if I can get up a list of memberships. It has people like Bulstrode Whitlock, Arthur Hazelrig, Philip Sidney, John Lyle, Henry Roll, Henry Vane the Younger, Phil Herbert, Dennis Bond, William Purfoy, James Harrington, William Constable, William Marsham, etc. on it, as its Lord Presidents at various points. In fact, Oliver Cromwell is only the president of it, theoretically, till 1649. The members of the council were the Earls of Denbigh, Mulgrave, Pembroke of Salisbury, Lords Grey and Fairfax, Lille, Roll, Oliver St. John, Wilde, Bradshaw, of course, Cromwell, Skipton, Pickering, Marsham, Hazelring, Harrington, Vanejun, Danvers, Armney, Mildlay, Constable, Pennington, Wilson, Whitlock, Martin, Ludlow, Stapleton, Hevington, Wallop, Hutchinson, Bond, Popham, Valentine, Walton, Scott, Purfoy, and Jones were first on the council. It was a quorum. Well, that's better way. There were 41 councillors elected by Parliament to the English the English Council of State, and they needed to have at least 9 for a quorum. They had 14 members at their first meeting, and the first elected president of the council was John Bradshaw, who was also president of the court at the trial of Charles I and the first to sign the king's death warrant. So, yeah, I think fairly agreeable with the idea of being regicide. The point is that a large bulk of the British public and the British middle classes had decided Charles I was bad. And let's be honest, he could have got away with the ship money. He could have got away with a lot of the things he'd done if he'd gone about it more sensibly. if he got Parliament on side, as Elizabeth I had done, as James I had done, as Henry VIII had done, although he tended to have a habit of killing lords. But Henry VIII tended to use Parliament to go back up to counterbalance the lords. Whereas Charles I, well, he wanted his favourites and his lords, who weren't all the lords, they were the lords he liked. He felt he should rule using them and ignore the rest of the lords and ignore the rest of Parliament. And they don't like being ignored. And the trouble is, the way the British system was set up, you can't do that. So, it gets fun and it gets a whole different topic than this video is supposed to be about the battle. But Cromwell, it's not the butcher some history makes him out to be. By a long way. He's not a nice guy. He is by no means a nice person. You do not cross Oliver Cromwell. You do not fight battles against him. He is very, very efficient. And he's quite possibly a religious maniac, as we might consider him these days, considering the way he is absolutely sure God guides his hand. But leaving that to one side, that's not unusual for that time period, so I would hesitate. If he was in now and acting like it, that we'd probably call him a religious maniac. In that period, well, that's their worldview. Cameron, funny thing is that linguistically, Frisian is the closest language to Old English. And this is sounding like to countries to like each other, to coexist peacefully at a time. Anyway, during the war, the constant is Cromwell, the constant is Monk, is Blake. The Rump Parliament exists, but that's slowly modified. The English Council of State slowly gets modified into the Lord Protector's Council and better organized, and slowly actually how do I put this? The Lord Protectorship comes of age, but it is slowly. When you are talking 1649, you are very much talking about a system which is far less centralized in terms of power in Cromwell's hands. But as time goes on, he gets more power because people give him more power. Because ultimately they don't want the burden of running things. And that always sounds crass when people say it, but it's true. Ryan Cash, yep, it was Charles Round 2 that was his death note. People always forget it was not a civil war, but civil wars. That is the problem. Scott, when the entire process is totally unprecedented, it's very easy to claim that the way the guy who got power but then lost was a total crazy guy and nobody assisted him. Yeah, there are a few things. After all, wouldn't want people to think that more than one person was responsible for the action of a republic. Yeah. 968 friend. Cromwell was the first British dictator the country has had until maybe recently. I don't think I wouldn't even consider current governments close to a dictatorship. He becomes dictatorship possibly during the rule of the major generals. That's a dictatorship. But even that's a weird dictatorship because each major general runs their own area and kind of goes back to almost the old feudal system, and each one has their own sort of various interpretations of the lords and laws. Gets weird. Well, look, question of UK citizens. The presentation of the English Scots flags representing the time-appropriate British Empire? Yes, that is. That's the Commonwealth flag at the time. That's why I put it up there. That's one of the... from the period we're talking about, that is the Commonwealth. And that's why I don't talk about the English fleet a lot in the video. I talk about the Commonwealth fleet because in many ways it is the Commonwealth fleet at this point. The Act of Union is... But you have to remember in April 1654, the Tender of Union was introduced to unite England and Scotland. Numeral army was similar to Roman legions, a good professional army that stayed loyal as long as their demands were met. Pretty much, as long as their demands were met. Robert Luke, the Irish love Cromwell. The Irish hate Cromwell, but I can understand that. Graham Haller, Monk, the man who sacked Dundee. Oh, but changed sides when it suited. Yep. Schumacher. Well, my take on the whole thing was there was a bunch of people who didn't really care, but thought that this Cromwell guy seemed all right and went along with him as long as he was winning. Pretty much. Bro, didn't Cromwell not essentially dissolve the Rump Parliament in 1653? He did, but then he calls the Bare Bones Parliament. And then that's dissolved, and then the First Protectorate Parliament is called. He keeps trying to call Parliament. Discord, I didn't mean to suggest that Cromwell was acting alone. One of the limitations of 200 characters, it was complex. The Irish and the Scots would disagree about him being a butcher and not being a butcher. I would... You see, the thing is, they would disagree about that, and I can see where they're coming from. But I would also say, in a look at the standards of the time, he's like the other generals. You don't like him, but he's not doing anything which anyone else isn't doing. And if we don't call them butchers, we either have to call all the generals at the period butchers, or we don't call any of them butchers. And now we have the commanders. So, honestly, I'm going to say this point. If you think British politics at this period, i.e. the Civil Wars, is complicated, it is nothing compared to, and I complete this, nothing compared to the cluster frigate. That is the competition over Dutch Supreme Commander. Okay? It is nothing compared to that. The Dutch commander, here is the issue, okay? In simple terms. Martin Tromp gets suspended after the Battle of the Shetland Islands, which, according to the Dutch, takes place in August. According to this book, really doesn't happen. According to several sources, there is a battle between frigates, but it's over the fishing fleet. So I know what ideas. No ideas what that's from. And basically, Trump is, well, he's from Holland and West Friese. So he is Amsterdam to an extent. He's a very experienced admiral. But he isn't considered aggressive enough. They want someone who's going to go and crush the English because we are the mighty Dutch Navy. We have got 150 ships added to our fleet. We have a mighty fleet, 230 strong. We can wipe the English from the sea. That's the idea they're thinking. And it's not happening. Because, as said earlier, Tromp has written to them and explained to them that The English have 50 ships which are more powerful than his ship, and his ship is the most powerful ship in the Dutch Navy. And the English fleet isn't that small, and they're quite well located, and their ports are quite well located. Now, what they do is they suspend Tromp, and they replace him. They quickly go with an admiral of the same fleet as he did. They go with his contemporary, Wit de With. Also, the Admiralty, who's of the Admiralty of the Maas, i.e. Rotterdam. Now, this caused trouble immediately because De With was the personal enemy of the Zeelandic fleet commander, Vice Admiral Johan Everson, who quit service because of a conflict with the States General. And it's probably good he quit service because De With was already planning on getting rid of him, apparently, if they got there. And tensions between the Amsterdam and the Rotterdam fleets and the various fleets had been moderated by the fact that Tromp and Everson were both staunch Orangists, i.e. they were supporters of William of Orange. But De With was a loyal servant of the States. He was a loyal Republican. And since the death of the Stadtholder William II of Orange, they'd, of course, been in charge. So they were the fleet. So the States General basically want one of their men in charge of the fleet. And they're using the idea that Tromp isn't aggressive enough to push that through. De With had been arguing for a policy that, was going to be more aggressive, aimed at destroying the inner fleet instead of passively defending the merchant convoys against English attack, and decided he would concentrate his forces and gain control of the seas. He set out with the primary aim of attacking the English fleet at anchor at the Downs near Dover. Departing from Schoonveld on the 25th of September 1652, and joined a squadron of Vice Commodore Michael de Ruyter there. However, the fleet is immediately hit by a storm. De With, who was also charged with protecting the trade routes, discovered that de Ruyter's ships, which had been with de Ruyter for a while, had been at sea for 2 months and needed to return to port. De Ruyter therefore suggests that it was better to simply keep doing what they'd already been doing and Tromp had been doing, with declining to fight the English, but escorting the merchant convoys and making sure they get safe. De With, however, is obsessed with the idea of a decisive battle. This is more than 3 centuries before the Cantae-Kessen, but it appears the decisive battle doctrine is longer lived than we all perhaps knew, because De With was obsessed with it and stated that I shall lustily lead the fleet to the enemy, and the devil may bring it back again. Let's be honest, those are words which are going to make you feel very happy if you're a sailor. Let's also be honest, they have replaced someone who was very popular in the fleet, who was understood to have looked after the fleet's needs, with someone who goes around and calls members of the fleet from other admiralties cowards and whoresons and all sorts of things on a regular basis. He is not a person who you really want in charge of your navy if you are not, how do I put this, from his fleet. Well, one bump. When did boarding become more sleet as a viable tactic? Probably World War Two. World War One, they still tried it. In World War Two, they did it. There was a couple of incidents where they did it, but it's really not viable once you get enough machine guns and ships get fast enough. You have to get them very much close. Oh, look, sarcastic comment on island loving Cromwell, Dr. Ice. I know. Oh, look, history is taught in US Canada tends to fixate on Cromwell's Irish campaign versus anything in Scotland. It does do. Shumish, a butcher is a commander who stupidly attacks and loses more lives than he should have. All ages, all areas, the same concept. Then Cromwell's definitely not a butcher. On that definition. And Dan Freeman, pretty sure the Scots regularly sacked the north of England, but there may have been an extra layer of viciousness in the wars of the Three Kingdoms. Religiously motivated civil wars, such fun. I always thought it was the wars of the Four Kingdoms, but we'll leave that on the side. That's got Cluster Frigate. I'm going to steal that. It's a good one. It sounds worse than it actually is. Dander with his rocky net hair. Honestly, he reminds me of Cardinal Richelieu. Jack Ray, fishing fleet battle. Sounds like something that could happen today with a certain fishing Charles Watt. Don't get me started. Look, Aaron Martin killed by a sniper during Battle of the English. I'm not so much killed by the sniper, killed by a lucky shot. It's kind of like Nelson. In that amount of smoke and heaving around, if a shot actually lands, it's not the sniping, it's luck. Cody85, would Dutch politics make more or less sense than a bunch of over-caffeinated squirrels on sugar trying to run a nut racket? You probably are close. Whip the whiff would really whip it with me. Yeah. All right. That's okay. John, look, Dutch politics and intrigue, and Cromwell's new model army sounds like a parallel of the Roman era. No wonder Cromwell inspired terror. Pretty much. 9685. Trying to destroy the British Navy is harder than one might think and really sounds far-fetched. That was the plan. I'm not getting into that one, Dan Freeman. So much. Is the idea of orange being used by Northern Irish politics as it's connected to Dutch somehow in this some complex way? Yes, that is the word orange. That's William of Orange. That's what they're bringing up. That's where the Orangemen come from. The Dutch oranges, and yeah. John Luke, the decisive battle, being proved useless against a determined enemy since Hannibal crossed the Alps. True. Jack Ray, even in the US, wearing orange on St. Patrick's Day was passed down in my family to me. I'm colorblind, so whatever. Anyway, I found out why after I was an adult. Ooh. Robert, Lord Nelson turned the decisive battle doctrine on its knees. Well, to be fair, he actually achieved a fairly decisive battle, but, you know, it's the campaign as much as the battle. Ryan Cash, pretty unusual that major maritime trade nations trying to rule the seas, anything. Oh, it's perfectly understandable, but it's their policy that's quite problematic. Ryan Cash, so true, Doctor. Richelieu, circa D'Artagnan and the Three Musketeers period. Bingo! Andrew Campbell, remember, this is not far removed from the time the Dutch killed the Prime Minister. I know. That is the Dutch are an interesting. That's an entire course I once had the pleasure of teaching as cover 3 modules on Dutch history during this period, and you have never seen a class of second years more silent than when you're explaining to them that yes, their book is not lying to them when it says that the Dutch did kill and eat one of their leading politicians and their sort of prime minister. Hi, Calhoun. Hi, Graham. Guys, stay well out of the orange thing, as what is today isn't what it really was. Way, way more complicated. Very true. Keep well away from what the orange thing is today. It gets a lot weirder, a lot more quickly. But it does, that's the roots it claims and it goes back to. So, here are the battles of the First Anglo-Dutch War. And I cannot state this more firmly. It's fun when you start realizing that this is a war which takes place in the Mediterranean as well as the North Sea and the Channel, because there's Plymouth, there's all sorts of things. But the timeline given, and certainly the timeline for this, is that there is a battle in July-August time, where in the Shetland Islands. Now, the thing is, the actions potentially available are this one in July, which takes place in the North Sea. This flotilla action is really weird. And so you have the Battle of Plymouth. Well, and I would like to just point this out. The Battle of Plymouth involves 36 ships under Michael de Ruyter, 45 ships under George Askew, and 60 are killed and wounded on the Dutch side, 91 are killed on the English side, or the Commonwealth side, and the battle is... Well, how do I put this? De Ruyter's appointed Vice-Commodore, and in the absence of Vice-Admiral Witt the Witth, who is in command of his squadron, not in command of the whole fleet, he's in charge. So I would have said that actually makes the Witth looks bad, but, you know, worse, but I don't know. The trouble is about this battle is that most, as de Ruyter points out in Plymouth, most of the crews were badly trained, mainly ships poorly maintained, and he had just 2 months of supplies. He tried to give the battle early without the burden of having to protect the convoy, and he does achieve a Dutch victory. So again, they win, but not the Witth, and it's just what's going on. But there are a few battles. Vision, my upstate New York school taught nothing of British history through 12 grades. I learned about Cromwell by watching the BBC's A History of Britain on public television while at university. Fun times. Pleasure, Carl Harmon. 23434. House Orange was, in the 16th century, 17th century, an important pillar of Protestantism and the Dutch geometry, and an important bulwark for English defence against Catholic power houses of France and Habsburg. Yeah. Death Squad, British revolutions are so boring by comparison. Yes, when we kill our kings, we do not eat them. I can, in nicest way, I would love to see someone suggesting that to Oliver Cromwell, because honestly, I think he would have probably thrown up at the thought. Cody, how many single and subflotillar actions happen in those, in addition to those charts? Dozens. As New Akibu 4472 points out, how desperate do you have to be to willingly ingest a politician? I'm not sure. In my USA school, it was world history and US history, so Britain didn't figure much before Revolutionary War. And after War of 1812, you don't hear of UK till World War II. But we do so much in that time. John Luke, the Royal Navy used to hang admirals for not being aggressive enough. The Dutch eat their PMs. You wonder if those practices were still being used today? No, we're not doing that again. Seneca, the Battle of Shetland Islands isn't Dutch versus English, it's the Dutch versus the fleet of Admiral Davy Jones. Potentially. Turning 343. To be fair, it was an orchestrated mob that caught the brothers DeWitt. True. Colin Cameron. Interesting. Could this war be one of the first candidates to be listed as a world war, like the UK versus Napoleon and other French wars were? Unfortunately, as it just takes place in the Mediterranean and the North Sea, not really a world war. Definitely a regional war, but not a world war. Once you start getting battles happening in the Caribbean, North Americas, Europe, Mediterranean, off the coast of Africa, and in the Indian Ocean, and even some single ship actions going on in the Southeast Asia, yeah, that's when you get a world war. No, Sean Mac, they really don't. So, that's what's going on. All right, then. I do love my system. It occasionally decides to tell me I've got no viewers on top there, and I look at that figure and it says 33, and I go, "Okay, Steam, okay, XSplit, we are acting up again." So it's now General Blake, General at Sea Robert Blake. Mm-hmm. Mm. And he's cool. I have to say, Blake is possibly one of the most interesting figures in terms of naval history. Because if you talked about him in the Napoleonic era, people like Nelson, like Rodney, like St. Vincent would talk quite freely of Blake. Blake was looked up to. And especially as the fact that he was able to. How do I put this politely? He was able to write to the Lord Commissioners of the Admiralty and enforce them to enact major reforms. Things like the Articles of War that reinforced the authority of an admiral over his captains, and setting aside so many things that set up what would be the future British naval policy. come from Robert Blake. He was always a general at sea. He joined the New Model Army as a captain in Alexander Popham's regiment. Distinguished himself at the Siege of Bristol and was promoted to lieutenant colonel. After his leading role in holding Lyme Regis during the Siege of Lyme Regis in April 1644, he was promoted to colonel. He then held the Siege of Taunton, during the Siege of Taunton. That earned him national recognition, and he famously declared that he would eat 3 of his 4 pairs of boots before he would surrender. He then also went on to win the Siege of Dunster in November 1645. He's appointed a general at sea in 1649, although it seems as though he's previously never spent much time at sea or even near the sea. He does seem to have engaged in trade for a period, and some Dutch writers have claimed that he spent 5 or 6 years in Scheveningen, which is in the Netherlands. But no one seems to be knowing if he spent time on the water or if he actually served at sea. We have no record of that. So as far as we know, he becomes general at sea, and that's when he first starts to command and understand a fleet. What we do know is that he is, rather like Tromp, a very good leader of people. He's very good at motivating his fleet. Colin Cameron, to be fair, British kings have been killed using red-hot pokers and other things in the past, so you can't say we are not inventive. We've used molehills as well to kill people. We are quite inventive when it comes to taking out our monarchs. Seneca, General at Sea, you are weird and trying dumb stuff with titles. Dan Freeman, because I know my history, British history, what's Blake's command during the Barbary pirate campaign against Barbary pirates, or conducting piracy against them? A second off. It was the British dealing with the Barbary pirates, much as later the Americans would have to deal with them. It was the British going, the Commonwealth going, you aren't going to mess with us. Jack Ray, it sounded like after this battle, the Commonwealth thought it had fought a decisive battle, but then didn't proceed with securing the surrounding seas. No, as I said in the recorded video, and I'll say in this one again, after this battle, the Commonwealth does think they've won, and as a result, they decide to charge off and go around the world doing all sorts of weird things. Colin Cameron, am I the same guy as the poet, or am I getting my Blakes confused? I think you're getting your Blakes confused. They might be related, but as far as I'm not really sure of that. Stromac, I think he said he would eat 3 of his 4 pairs of shoes because he would need a 4th pair to walk out and negotiate the terms of surrender. That's definitely taking this a little bit too far, Roland Cash, that question. I don't want to be banned from YouTube forever. But no, he is an interesting officer. And technically, he serves 1649 to 1657. So he achieves all he does in 8 years of service. You know, it's sometimes that he is sent to his Barbary pirate campaign is more sent to deal with the Bay of Tunis. And I'll just explain this because there has been a question. In 1655, so the year after this war and the First Anglo-Dutch War ends, the Bay of Tunis, that's the Bay, B-Y, of Tunis, the ruler of Tunis, is, well, Blake is sent to demand the Bay of Tunis return an English merchant ship and English prisoners, plus indemnity in a future agreement to not do this ever again. He then sailed back and forth between Sardinia, Tunis, and Sicily for a couple of months, and sent the demands again. He arrived in April at Portofania, where the Barbary ships had gathered for their intended voyage to the Dardanelles to help the Turks that season. He divides his fleet in two. The smaller ships he puts in his first division. The larger ships he keeps in his second division. The first division attacks the Barbary ships, boarding and burning them by 8 a.m., while his second division of larger ships attacks the forts and silences them by 11 a.m. This was the first time it was recorded that ships alone had defeated ship or fortifications. English casualties were a mere 25 killed and 40 wounded. Whilst the Bay still refuses his demands, Blake's attack helped the Venetians in their battle against the Ottoman states 2 months later, at the action 21st of June 1655. It also led to the Ottomans improving Portofania's fortifications over the next decade. But eventually, the Barbary campaigns continue, and the British get the result they want. And I also tend to be convinced by Lord Nelson, who seems to have written to Admiral Sir John Jervis, "I do not reckon myself equal to Blake," before going on to outline his plans for his own attack that he was to do on Tenerife. Because, of course, Blake succeeded at Tenerife. One wonders if his time running sieges and being a general a colonel in charge of sieges, of being besieged and besieging others, had given him insights which perhaps most other admirals hadn't had up until that point, and allowed him to conduct them better. I don't know, but he seemed to be fairly successful when it comes to getting into places which traditionally have been considered impregnable for warships. Let's go. The Commonwealth after having won and Dutch carrying on the war. That's, how do I put it? The Commonwealth don't think they've won the war after battle. We'll get into this when it's at the end and when it's at the point we're getting into it. At the moment, we're still going through the Dutch command issues. But what they do is they think they've secured enough of victory that they can blockade the Dutch with less ships and send other ships to relieve off ships which are penned in by the Dutch in the Mediterranean, which weakens their fleet in the northern waters, which are decisive waters. You can understand why they perhaps make that decision, but it doesn't work out that well. The Dutch then think they win after a couple of battles, think they've won the battle, and the English, the Commonwealth comes back. It's just both sides have interesting points. Colin Cameron. So he basically brought in 250 years of relative safety for British merchants when they were regularly reminded of what the bad thing would be. Anyway, the Dutch command issues. The Dutch command issues are far more complicated than just the ones at the top. There's also the ones at the other ranks, because if we consider it, they have Johan Everson, who's not there, but because of his personal animosity with De With, is a considerable presence and will actually be invited back along with Tromp when this is over. You have De Ruyter, who seems to think De With is an idiot. Is very polite about it, but does seem to be not keen on it. And you have Cornelius Everston the Elder, Johan's elder brother, who's only a sort of Commodore, but is trying to keep things managed and sensible. And that's not even all the admirals you have in the Dutch Navy. And this is possibly something interesting compared to the English, because the English have a lot less senior officers. Mainly because a lot of them have been killed, but they have seen. They have, as well as these three, they have acting Rear Admiral Gideon de Wilt. They have Rear Admiral Jan Gideson Weber. They have Rear Admiral acting Rear Admiral Adrian Brunsfeld of the Admiralty of Friesland. They have. I thought they had another admiral. I might be wrong. They might. No, yeah, I think I was wrong. That's just a name which looks like admiral. So they have presence in the fleet. A Commodore, a Rear Admiral. So one Commodore, one Rear Admiral. And a second Rear Admiral, and a third Rear Admiral. Well, there are two acting Rear Admirals. And another Commodore, and of course the Vice Admiral himself. So they have 6 senior officers. And this is when you start to get a problem, because if you've got a Vice Admiral and you've got roughly 4 Rear Admirals acting, 2 acting, 2 commissioned Rear Admirals, I think. From memory, that's the breakdown. Yeah, I think that's the breakdown. And you have 2 Commodores. And you have some captains who have seniority commissions as well, which is something interesting they have. Or rather seem to have. You have problems. There's even the brilliantly named, of course, and future admiral here, Isaac Sveers, who of course will have a destroyer named after him, which will fight in World War II. Who is also the Admiralty of Amsterdam and will end up a Vice Admiral and is a senior captain at this point. just one of many in that. There are a plethora of commanding personalities. And the Dutch fleet is not so much a homogeneous whole as a collection of flotillas. In fact, if you want to understand how problematic it can be to command a coalition fleet, or a coalition force of any shape or size, have a look at the Dutch in this period. They are pretty much constantly fighting each other, arguing each other, trying to work out who's senior to who. Who should be in command of what? Well, the middle one's De Ruyter. What do you expect? Anything less than the globe is not what he's going to accept. Vision, is Commodore a Dutch word in origin? Oh, that one gets interesting. So, it actually, the rank of Commodore comes from French, commandeer, which was one of the original highest ranks of the orders of knighthood, and tended to be the title given to a knight in charge of a command, a local part of the order's territory, of an order's territorial possessions. The Dutch Navy decide to pick up the rank of Commodore for various reasons. It's usually for temporary posts, but becomes a permanent rank in 1955. The Royal Navy introduced it in the 17th century to combat the cost of appointing more admirals. Because, well, an admiral is a permanent post and is expensive, whereas a commodore is a temporary position created as a title bestowed upon captains to command a squadron of more than one vessels, and merely becomes a sort of senior captain's position. It's only more recently that they've started to be a permanent role and a actual proper rank. Colin Cameron, I dread using this phrase, but it sounds like a classic case of too many cooks. True. There are lots of people who all think they should be command. Seneca, are there any ship names in this battle that also were used in World War II? There's Zealandia, Hollandia, and Amsterdam, but I'm not sure if I can't remember if they're in World War II. I think I have seen Dutch ships those names. But not really a lot of them. There's a lot of admirals whose names turn up in various ships. De Ruyter, Wilt, Isaac Squeers. There's Launch, Penson, quite a few, and of course Everston. And I think Valk. I'm not sure that it isn't his son though. It's named for. It's an interesting time to be Dutch. It really is. And this is the other point, and I will make this one. The VOC, the Dutch East India Companies, has a sort of interesting role in this battle because they provide some of the largest ships. And honestly, could be considered an admiralty in and of themselves. But more realistically, and this gives you another issue, the Dutch East India Company are the most non-aligned of the merchants. And for this reason, you end up with the fact that the Prins Willem, which is one of the largest ships in the fleet, it technically has 56 guns, so it technically outguns the Brederode, which is the, of course, Trump's flagship, but isn't the Wit's flagship. We'll get onto that, why it's not. Belongs to the Middelburg chamber of the VOC. And then there's another interesting question. There's actually, we're not quite sure of the name of the second ship, which is either the Henriette Louise or the Princess Louise, which is Commodore de Ruyter's flagship. And that also belongs to the Middelburg chamber of the VOC and is a 48-gun ship. So they are two of the largest ships. They're also two of the fattest and the slowest. They are possibly some of the more complicated vessels to try and manage in tight waters. And yet, they are the ships the Dutch have to command from. What is most interesting about this battle, really, is that the VOC are quite so important to it, because 4 of the largest ships, one which may have 40 or possibly 30 guns, the Vrede, and the Vogstries, as well as the 2 already mentioned, which definitely has 40, are from the VOC, are from the Dutch East Indian Company. If you don't have these big ships, the Dutch fleet would look a lot weaker than it does, because you quickly realise that the Dutch only have 9 ships which have 40 or more guns. Nine ships. The vast majority of the Dutch fleet, and the Dutch fleet, remember, numbers 68 ships, are 30 guns or less. Make that 10 ships which are 40 guns or less. This is the trouble with using my list from earlier. It's spread across 2 slides, and I missed one. Cascading, you're doing a live, and I have to leave soon. Sad day. Take care, Cascading. Don't worry, I do another one on Sunday. And there are some 60-second videos due out tomorrow, if they're all uploaded and working. Also lets you bypass those pesky time in rank seniority issues if the younger captain's more competent group commander. True, and if he wins a battle, you might have to promote him to admiral over the seniority as a reward for service if he wins a battle. Hello, George Newman. In Sandringham, there are a lot of reused English-British ship names. Yes, when we get to the English ships, you'll see a lot of names coming again. The Brits were always trying to think of ways to increase their shares in the prize. There's no admiral in the mix. Then it's another 1/8 there. There's always an admiral in the shares. See much. Nobody beats the Spanish for age of sail ship fires and explosions. Oh no, were ships given ratings at this time? Well, this is the period when you have ships called things like a great frigate or frigate built. So they're starting to rate them, but they're not quite rating them. There are ships which are considered ships for fighting the battle, and ships which aren't. But the trouble is, most fleets are much of a mixture. And remember, most fleets are made up, majority of merchant ships converted to war use. So actually carrying 28 guns, 24 guns makes you useful. Ships which, in the time of Nelson, wouldn't be anywhere near the battle, they'd be kept far back from it, are actually plunging into it and engaging in fights with ships which have twice as many guns as them, or more than. Because, and this is the real issue for the Dutch, the British fleet. Now, for the Dutch fleet, I have a lot of information. Thanks to their bureaucracy, I do have a huge amount of information. For the English fleet, I really don't. I have what was the official flagship and what was the actual flagship. And I will expand this out. You can see behind this is the Resolution, which of course was the Royal Prince, the Royal Prince, and prior to that, but it was renamed. I can't think why. And that's what actually Blake ends up commanding from. For instance, there's the Sovereign with 106 guns. There's the Resolution with 88. The James with 66, the Triumph with 60, the Vanguard with 58, the Andrew with 56, the Speaker with 54, the Lion with 50. So, by the time you reach the level at which the Dutch are mainly operating at, you've already got ships which are a lot bigger. Then you've got the Coventine, 44, Garland, 44, Advice, 42, Diamond, currently a member of the fleet, as we all know, 42, Foresight, 42, Pelican, 42, Ruby, 42, Assistance, 40, Assurance, 40, Dragon, currently also a member of fleet, 40, London, soon to be coming again member of fleet, a hired merchant vessel, but with 40, Nonsuch, named for the palace and the place which is not far from where I live. There's still a Nonsuch Park. If you want to go around it, you can see where the palace was once dismantled, which was there. It's not the current building that's there. It was a much grander wooden affair, and it's a lovely place to walk around. President. Yes, there was a president, even before the capture of USS President. Surprising enough, the Richard and Martha was the hired merchantman. The Portsmouth. The Anthony Bonaventure, which I think in naval terms becomes the Bonaventure later on. The Hound, potentially ex-Dutch. The Guinea, 34. The Hercules, 34. The Lisbon Merchant, 34. The Convert, ex-French. The Mary, a flyboat. So designed to be very fast. Exchange, 30, a hired merchantman. Cullen, 28, hired merchant. Prudent Mary, 28, hired merchantman. Advantage, 26, ex-Dutch. Falmouth, 26 gun, ex-Dutch. Samson, 26 gun, ex-Dutch. Martha, 25, hired merchantman. Golden Dove, 24, hired merchantman. Old Warwick, 24. Pearl, 24. Acorn, 22, hired merchantman. Signet, 22. Little President, so there's both President and Little President, 22. Nightingale, 22. Gift, 16. A hired merchant Pink, which is, of course, a very small vessel. Paradox 12, and Renown, which at this point is a fire ship. Which, let's be honest, Renowns will be renowned for setting things on fire. Slightly different shape of a fleet. As Cody 85, so most of the Dutch ships are sloops or so. Most of the Dutch ships are what we would consider fourth rate. That's the closest thing you can really compare them to. Seneca, Vanguard and Lion. I heard these names before. Yes. HMS Bru Runs Out. Sovereign is the ship which had previously been called Royal Sovereign and would be later called Royal Sovereign. Yeah. The Royal Navy loves it. The British love getting changing names occasionally. And it's a flexible fleet. Here is the interesting thing, though. Because, again, you read this book, you don't get any idea of Blake having a second in command. He must have done. There is no way you were commanding this fleet and not having a second in command, but no one's listed. So, presumably, one of the colonels at sea had seniority. Dr. Clarke, I like how there are British ships that might be a prize from another country. We are not quite sure because there would just be so much paperwork if we get dry. It's like trying to find out their captains. The thing was, I have a policy whenever I do these things of if I can find out all the captains' names, I'll put in all the captains' names. If I can only find out one, I won't put it in, I'll discuss it. Con Cameron. It's a flyboat, not a messenger ship. You see, that's what I was thinking, Colin Cameron, and I do agree. A flyboat is normally a messenger ship, but it's carrying 32 guns. So it's not really a flyboat like you'd think of it. I think it's a mail ship. I think it's described as a flyboat, but I think it's a mail ship. It was originally called Sovereign of the Seas, then changed to Sovereign, then again changed to Royal Sovereign. Looked it up earlier today after your video. Yeah. It has a nice history. And they're happy with this formation, believe it or not. They're quite happy with this fleet size. It's quite a capable fleet. They're quite happy that they are going to do whatever they need to do. We can be honest that the big ships, though, in this fleet are the Prince Royal, which will surrender at the 4 days battle. Which is a battle in the Second Anglo-Dutch War. And the Sovereign of the Seas, which Royal Sovereign and eventually is well, how do I put it? She eventually gets burnt, but let's get a picture up of her. Always good to have a picture of the Sovereign of the Seas to come up. So, add source. Images. I'm not sure if you can hear, but my sister appears to be doing baby talk to the puppy behind me. I'm hoping you all can't hear, but if at any point I look like I'm disturbed by listening to something, I'm just explaining why. And there we go. Bum bum. So there we go. We have Sovereign of the Seas, and we have the Prince Royal, or as it's known at this point, the Resolution. And these ships are massive compared to their counterparts. She is built as a 55-gun raw ship. She's rebuilt as a 70-gun ship. Then rebuilt in 1663 as a 92-gun first-rate ship of the line. Sovereign of the Seas, well, she is built as a 90-gun first-rate ship of the line in 1637. By 1660, she's rebuilt as a 100-gun first-rate ship of the line. And in 1685, she's rebuilt again as a 100-gun first-rate ship of the line. Slowly rising in tons burthen, because as built, she's 1,522 tons burthen. As first refit, 1,605 tons burthen. And as final refit, well, rebuild, is 1,683 tons burthen. She gets big. And she has a very nice decorative stern. So this is something to think about. And the thing is, they do seem to have left the stern on them. Now, that might surprise you with the joy that is the Cromwellian period of the Commonwealth and all that sort of thing. But actually, you have to remember, warships, especially big capital ships, are a visible demonstration of the power of the state. And the state don't look powerful unless it's got lots of gold on it. It just doesn't. Colin Cameron, it's a flyboat, not a messenger ship. I think I've answered that one. Anna, what English fleet would be complete without a French prize? It wouldn't have been. It would not have been. John Luke, Renown will return as a Type 83 in 1983. We hope so. That's good. Could the flyship be sitting out the line to relay flags and 32 guns is big enough for it to defend itself if a couple of Dutch ships manage to get around to it? They're not really doing line of battle as you would understand it. Line of battle is not something which they really engage in at this point. The Battle of Plymouth is fought by the fleet's the English fleet under Askew keep charging into the Dutch convoy and charging through, firing, coming back, charging again. You know, keep going to weather gauge and basically just keep going round and through them. The line of battle is sort of, it's not become the fixed doctrine where you've got a line of battle and you've got a ship repeating signals as you sort of imagine it, as it becomes. It's more of a, how do I put this politely? It's more of a melee action where the line of battle is what we initially consider, but not really. Oh. Stevenson, Wiki says it has 42 pounders and lower gun deck, but I suspect that's years later. I think so. John Luke, I thought seniority would be decided by whichever officer was good at pinching stuff. Yeah, you always wish. That might be more efficient. Go on camera. So what was added in these refits? Length, beam, or height? Well, let's put it this way. Not usually much of the first two unless they do some major work. That's good. Less of a line of battle, more of a pub brawl in ships? To an extent, yes. Anyway, Kentish appears to have been had a line of battle that sailed opposite the Dutch and then faced them pretty good. Maybe the first. There is certainly an argument, but it's also, you have to remember, it's not Blake's intention, and I'll be getting into this, to engage in a line of fleet action. But let me first get rid of these because the Dutch fleet has begun. And the Dutch fleet is fun. So, the Dutch fleet is more complicated than, as I said, the British fleet. Or the Commonwealth fleet. As pointed out earlier, you have quite a lot of senior officers. You also have quite a lot of rear admirals and vice admirals. In this group, you already have 3 rear admirals. You have acting Rear Admiral Gideon de Wilt. You have Rear Admiral Jan Gudsen Verburg, who is a commissioned Rear Admiral, so he's not acting Rear Admiral, so theoretically he should be senior to any acting Rear Admiral. And then you have acting Rear Admiral Adrian Brunsveld. Now, these are ships from the Admiralty of Amsterdam, which provides the vast majority of ships. You'll also notice that these are some of the more powerful ones, because these are the 40 and 42 gun vessels. So these are some of the bigger vessels that the Dutch rely on, but there's also a healthy chunk of 28 and 30 gun ships. You'll also notice, if you look down at Admiralty of the Maas, there's a curiously large vessel called Brederode, which has 54 guns, and that is, of course, Trump's flagship, which refuses to have De With. So the Princess Louise is De With's flagship on the second day, and that fills everyone with joy, knowing that he needs a different flagship on the second day. And that, of course, is the Princess Louise, which is only 36 guns. So that tells you what all the big ships felt about him, if he has to go on such a small vessel for his flagship. Honestly, all of you, imagine this. Imagine telling Earl St. Vincent, if you were one of the only first-rate ship in his fleet, that you didn't want him aboard. Imagine his reaction. Remember Admiral Duncan's reaction. Holding people over the side. The Articles of War, which will come in after the loss at Dungeness, and allow admirals to hold people to account, are a big part in that. But honestly, the lessons that the English learn during this war are not just learnt from their own fleet, they're learnt from watching the Dutch and what goes on with them. And of course, there's the Isaac Swears up there in charge of the Angel Gabriel, or the Engel Gabriel, a 36-gun vessel of the Admiralty of Amsterdam. And yes, you are right, the Maria is captured, and the Gorkum is captured and recaptured. That tells you how this fleet action is going to go. Then we have some more ships. We have Commodore Cornelius Everson de Elder, who's in the Zeeuws Leeuw, which is Admiralty of Zealand vessel. Then going down, you have the Prince Wilhelm, which is, of course, De With's first flagship. And you have the Henrietta Louise, or Princess Louise, which is Commodore de Ruyter's flagship, which, of course, belonged to Middelburg Chamber of the VOC. And you really get a picture of this fleet and its organisation. You will notice that I've organised them actually back to front, in that they're organised by Admiralty. So they're grouped together, so you know these are the ships which come from the same Admiralty. Then by number of guns, and then by name. So their order of the big guns of the Admiralty, alphabetical order, then guns in terms of largest to smallest, and then alphabetically in terms of name. Okay, so that's how I've set this up. And of course, it has the leaf, which is owned apparently by a gentleman called Z, who signs himself Z. I did think perhaps the Admiralty of Zealand, but apparently not, according to what the records I've been able to access in the last couple of weeks when I was putting this together. Because I wanted to check. You also notice that they have 4 fire ships. The Inhum, the Grasstandard, the Vergelbees, and the Voss. And fire ships being part of your fleet is a fairly normal thing. Remember, these are very much melee actions, and there are lots of people looking to try and repeat the battle, or, well, the routing of the Armada. And as you'll see, Vrede has 30 guns, but may have 40 guns, so she's interesting. She is really quite interesting. And finally, we have the Admiralty of the Northern Water, with their ships, which again, 30 gun, 28 gun, and 24 gun ships. And you have the Bur van Alkmaar, or the Wapen van Alkmaar, which is the vessel which blows up. So yes, the Dutch have 2 ships, 1 ship blow up, 1 ship captured, a second one captured, but they think the English think it's sinking, so abandon it, and the Dutch recapture it. And please note, I've put this in both the live in the long patrol, but I'm also going to mention this in the live. The Wapen von Eriksson, this one, is listed on Wikipedia as being the Admiralty of the Northern Quarter, which is the Admiralty of the Norderker Water. And when you go through it, it's when you look at all the results, it comes from that Admiralty. So I have of course gone with Admiralty, but I'm just pointing out, if you do the Wikipedia search to check and maybe learn more, you will see this interesting thing. But also interesting enough, if you click on the Admiralty of the Northern Quarter, it does take you to Northern Quarter, the correct Admiralty. So the hyperlink works, it's just the naming which is slightly strange. From Hannah, were the later rebuilds when James, Duke of York, was Lord Admiral? I think so. Constance, what would the crews look like ethnically at this point? A hodgepodge. They would mostly have been English, Irish, Welsh, and Scottish, mostly. But they do pick up flotsam and jetsam wherever they go in the world and whatever they get. But especially in terms of the Commonwealth ships, Dutch ships were surprisingly large numbers of French, Belgians, and Lowland Germans, but majoritively Dutch. Sea Winch, they liked to exchange 4 or 5 broadsides, then board in the smoke, whichever ship was opposite at the time. Yes. That's good. Not many ships from the Admiralty of Mars turned up. They couldn't find their way out. More actually, this is actually one of the interesting things, because you do notice when you start looking at that, some of the Navy, some of the Admiralties are really underrepresented. And Zealand, Mars, Freeland. Well, Zealand you can sort of understand, but especially Mars. Mars has bigger ships. The Admiralty of the Rotterdam Admiralty tends to have some of the biggest ships the Dutch have, and they haven't turned up. Now, there are reasons for this, but most of those reasons go back to De Witt and the way the commander's been chosen, and the fact is that they've been doing other operations. Too much. I suspect the reason the sailors. No, these sailors were very loyal to Trump, and they basically called him insulting names. I'll be getting into that in a second. It's not. It's not that they are. Honestly, those are sailors who don't mind being the center of action. They've been the center of action with Trump many times. They just don't like him. They just don't like the whiff. Colin Cameron is how to ask. Is this battle where the Commonwealth Royal Navy first gains on Achilles? Not in this battle. The most annoying debates antagonism from European naval historians is between England and Netherlands. It does get fun. So what ships got sunk at the Battle of Kentish Knock? Well, pretty much one. The Bru von Alkmaar, or the Wappen von Alkmaar, which is one of the Admiralty of the Northern Waters vessels, which blows up. So, this one. They are interesting, is all I can say. So, the pre-battle. So let's first of all give you all a rundown of what you've got fighting what is available. The Dutch, including fire ships, have 62 ships, 1,900 guns, and 7,000 sailors. Which, if we're talking about it, just quickly putting this, finding the figures. I have notes in somewhere. Ah, yes. So, the Dutch are quite heavily outnumbered. In fact, decisively, because the English have 68 ships, 2,400 guns, and 10,000 sailors. So, if that's going to be the measure of your force, then you're in trouble. Because, well, that's an average of 30 guns per ship. And it's an average of 113 sailors per ship. Now, fire ships do, of course, bring these things down, and you can adjust for them, but the average British ship, the average Commonwealth ship, is 35 guns per ship. And the average crew is a 447 per ship. Now, Why does this matter? Because as I think Steve Windish has put it earlier, and very correctly, ships of this time usually like to fire a few broadsides, 4, 5, sometimes a little 3, sometimes as many as 7, and then close and board. So, if you have more, that really does, especially if you're doing short-term engagements, the more firepower in the beginning does have an impact. And if you've got more sailors, then you're more able to take attrition, but also more able to succeed in boarding actions. And again, it's the sailors you've got. The sailors you have in terms of the boarding forces are quite a lot of them are personnel which have come across from the various fighting factions in the War of the Four Kingdoms, the Civil War that's been raging in Britain. So these are experienced fighters. That's the only real way to describe it. They're experienced fighters. Mm-hmm. And again, they're also well-drilled, well-trained crews. That's the other thing the Commonwealth has an advantage on. These ships are being trained and run by people who are mostly war fighters first. Which has an effect both on accuracy and the speed of reload. The Dutch are no slouches. I'm not saying the Dutch are bad. In fact, I think sometimes de Ruyter gives them a bad name because he's always saying how much work they need to be better and better. And I think that's probably because de Ruyter always wants them to be better. But they are the Commonwealth forces have a slight advantage. They have a capability. And then you have the other advantage. And that is that Blake gets the weather gauge. It's an Age of Sail battle. The same will be true the whole way through the Age of Sail. The commander who gets the weather gauge has an advantage because they can set the pace and the nature of any action. Those who don't have the weather gauge are subject to the tender whims of the commander who does. Take care, Roland Cash. Adfab, interesting so many of the Dutch ships named after people seem to be named after Dutch who fought the English, e.g. the current frigate sailing as part of the CSG-21. Elson, yes. Adfab, I do love the Admiralty, Dutch Admiralty titles. Admiral of the Mars. Well, that from the Admiralty of the Mars. Cody 85. What style of cannon are these ships carrying, and does that affect the battle anyway? Some of them are carrying bronze cannon, but some of them are starting to have iron cannon of types. You're dealing with a cannon transition period, but again, one of these nations has just been through a civil war and has tended to buy a lot of cannon and do a lot of work on its cannon. The other navy hasn't had to for a few in those recent years. That's the point. You're dealing with a Commonwealth fleet, which, whilst itself might not have been fighting necessarily fleet actions for much of that period, is staffed and is crewed and led by people who have been at war for several years by now. It's going to sound terrible, but war is its own natural selection. So whilst Blake serves in the Navy from 49 to 57, as was noted, when the war breaks out between the parliamentarians and the government in 1640, he pretty much joins straight up as soon as the war begins, and he starts fighting. He's injured during the Battle of Portland. He's involved in several duties. And as I said, joins a new model army as a captain. You're not joining the new model army straight away as a captain if you haven't already demonstrated you're a fairly proficient soldier. And probably a quick learner, as there's no school to teach you. There's no place to go to learn. There's no Sandhurst in this period. Britain did have a habit of honing skills at home, fighting each other. Smart recruiting, really. To an extent. The big thing that happens pre-battle, and this is the big thing for De With and for the confidence of his force. De With starts out on the Princess Louise. That's the ship he's been sent out on. And at 2:30, and this is on the 8th of October or 28th of September, depending on which calendar you're in. He has 5 vessels who've drifted too far north, but he now wants to command from the Brederode, which was, of course, Brederode, Tromp's former flagship. Tromp's crew, and this is an age of personal recruiting, so I know Steve has raised an interesting point about not wanting to be a center of the firepower, but I think it's more interesting. This was probably probably the fact that the crew was mostly recruited by Tromp and hadn't been expecting to lose Tromp. The crew refused to let him aboard and call him a green cheese, and threatened to fire a salve on his boat if he did not stop waving around his commission papers from the States General. In fact, this is a testimony to the fact that also already, even as soon as he joins the fleet, hundreds of sailors have been deserting. Hundreds of sailors. Also, officers have been disappearing. So, we can't be quite sure about the figures. The figures I gave you for the crews, etc., are the official figures. But we're fairly sure the Dutch crews might well have been lower than this. At one point, they try to call in Cornelis Everston the Elder. Remember, I talked about the Zealandic Commodore, the guy who was the elder brother of Johan Eversson, the one who had resigned. And he tries to come over to negotiate. The thing is, De With lets the situation get on till Blake is within half a mile of the fleet. At which point, De With is forced to go to the nearest ship available, which is the Prins Willem, where he apparently finds the majority of officers drunk and the crew consisting of untrained personnel, mostly landsmen. In contrast, Blake is on his flagship, the Sovereign, and he looks around and goes, we're going to be fighting near sandbanks, because he knows where Kentish Knock is, and there's a big sandbank and all sorts of things there. And goes, you know what? I don't want to get stunk on a sandbank. I want to be leading my ships. So he transfers to the Resolution. As example earlier. No trouble at all. Very welcome, General at Sea. Would you like some small beer? Yes, thank you. Let's see what's going on here. Blake's aim is the traditional aim at this point. To break the Dutch line. And the reason that's the aim is because whilst the fleet is in line of battle, you cannot you cannot board, and because their ships can support each other, and you cannot therefore take prizes and win the battle. But if you can break the line, well, you can do all those things. It's kind of interesting that Blake starts off trying to break the line. Then we go through a couple of centuries of everyone trying to keep the line. And then you have Jervis. Well, Rodney does it a bit. Jervis does it a bit more. And Nelson finally does it to the point at which everyone realizes they're doing it. The British get back to breaking the line. That's good. How entrenched was the idea of nationality at this point? E.g., would a French sailor refuse to serve on an English ship because English, or did most work for whomever paid? Depends where you come from in France. Occasionally they had a few Breton sailors, but again, it's more to do with religion would affect where you served. If you were Huguenot or Protestant French, you might serve on an English ship. But if you were Catholic, you certainly wouldn't. And the same with Dutch. Boarding an enemy ship was still used by the British in World War II. The crew of HMS Bulldog in Newton. Oh, yes, and as also there's the example of Cossack and the Altmark incident, and Liverpool and the Asamamaru incident. There are all sorts of boarding actions which take place, but really they are context dependent. Cody, well, the British officers did have a school of battle, but it did have a habit of killing cadets. Probably, yes. Jack Ray, imagine how well they could have done with iron brew instead of beer. Distinguish, how would you like to go down in history as the Admiral of Green Cheese? Yeah. It wasn't fun. Anyway, so the battle. Let's consider the battle itself. Blake's intending to break the Dutch line. The Whiff is intending to attack the British and let the devil take care of getting the fleet home. It's always nice when the commanders agree on what's going to happen. Anyway, it was very unfavourable for the Dutch, as they said. As I said, they were in the leeward position, and whilst that would normally give them longer range, due to the gentle winds and this advantage was just absence. It wasn't helping them. And the English ships are larger, they have thicker hulls, they're better armed, and they're inflicting severe damage. And that is one of the things you'll remember, is that, yes, the British don't take a lot of ships, but they do damage a lot of ships. Rather pertinent, it seems, the Sovereign and James actually ran aground on Kentish Knock Sandbank itself and managed to, with difficulty, work themselves free. The Resolution and Dolphin managed to venture too far forward, chasing down the enemy and trying to break their line, and were surrounded by Dutch vessels, but English vessels came to their rescue, which I wonder if DeWitt thought, well, when looking at it, thought, So the English go to save their admiral, but would mine come to save me? Probably not. Anyway, the Prince William is disabled, and that means that the Whiff has no command of what's going on, but actually that's not necessarily a bad thing, considering he's turning out to be tactically not the best admiral in the world. And by 7 o'clock, the fighting stopped due to the onset of darkness. The fleets had just finished this sort of single maneuver engagement, so they've been going on fighting each other for about 2 hours. At this moment in time, the Maria had been captured. The Gorkon was abandoned, as said, by the English, because it was in a sinking condition, but Dutch managed to reoccupy and save her. And then the Bru van Alkmaar pretty much blew up at this point. So it was a last shot which probably set her afire. Several Dutch ships leave the formation during the night. Then, in the next day, in the early morning, a further 10 Dutch ships, mostly captains from Zealand, who disliked the Whiff and broke off and decided to sail home. Possibly due to the fact that in the morning council of war, de Whiff had called all Zealand captains cowards and warned them that in Holland there was a lot of wood available to make gallows. I did find that interesting, that line, and I've been going through it. And yes, he does seem to have used that invective. So, they've lost 2 ships, recaptured 1, but somehow have managed to go down to 49 ships during the night. So, they've gone from 62 to 49, so lost, broadly speaking, 13 ships have disappeared. And in the same time, Blake's been reinforced. So he's gone from 68 to 84. So at this point, you can imagine Blake's reaction. Woohoo! Anyway. De Whiff is still obsessed with trying to fight the Commonwealth. And he now positions his force to roughly the southeast of the Commonwealth ships. And aims to sail south in order to get the weather gauge. However, some ships had difficulty beating up wind and coursed too far to the west and were badly mauled by the fire of the English rear. And the Dutch fleet had hardly moved into its intended position because when the wind turned to the northeast, which gave the English the weather gauge again. De Ruyter and Everston, that's Cornelius Everston, at this point managed to convince de Whiff that it was inevitable and the Dutch fleet needed to withdraw. And de Whiff describes it himself apparently as a herd of sheep fleeing the wolves. And basically, de Whiff and de Ruyter cover the retreat with a dozen ships and help the Dutch to get away without losing any more vessels. The English fleet halted its pursuit when the Flemish shoals are reached, and de Whiff decided that he would quickly repair the fleet in Wilson Basin and then make another attempt at defeating the enemy. His fellow flag officers thought he was absolutely insane, and Reuter tactfully pointed out such courage is too perilous. At which point, de Whiff finally agrees to withdraw the fleet to Helvetus, where it arrived on 2nd of October, or 12th of October, so in about 4 days' time. It's not a good battle for the Dutch. Shomak, Jesus, if you're going to bring up wood, say something about how there's plenty of wood to make new ships, or maybe something vaguely inspiring. Don't threaten to hang your captains. Yep. Jack Ray, Dewitt's mouse seems to have been rather unproductive towards the end of end set forth by his mind. Rather a house divided. Certainly. But Scott, threatens you commanders from a navy that feel they're essentially a separate nation is well known to encourage them to fight for you. Ah, no, wait, the other thing. Yes. Turning 3434. I agree. In my experience, the Dutch are very direct with their thoughts. Very, very direct in their thoughts. But I think perhaps some tact would have been sensible in a supreme commander. Or rather, it's fine to be direct in your thoughts. It's not necessarily fine to let those thoughts come out unmodified. And yes, the British do hang ad captains and admirals for their ships' masts and yardarms. But the fact is, they're not hanged because they're Zealandic. They're hanged, or because they're hanged because they failed to perform in battle. So what are the consequences? Well, for the English, they're hubris. They really are. As I've mentioned earlier, the strategically inexperienced Commonwealth decided that this victory was great, and it meant that they could send a squadron off to rescue the squadron that had got caught in the Mediterranean. The Dutch had a Punic War moment and decided that they'd recall their own Quintus Fabius Maximus Verussus, otherwise known as just Fabius, aka Martin Tromp. And, well, they don't just recall him. They recognised they need larger ships to take on English and instituted a major building program of 60 ships that would actually only be completed years after the conflict and first see action in the opening stage of the Second Anglo-Dutch War. So that's a big thing for strategically. According to DeWitt, this, besides a lack of sufficient number of fire ships, had been the main cause of Dutch failure. He tends to point out many a light English frigate could outshoot the average Dutch warship. However, public opinion wasn't so polite to deal with. In fact, they blamed him. And this is a pamphlet which is kind of interesting. It turns up in about 4 different books, and it turns up on Wikipedia. And it's pretty cool. From this disorder and unwillingness to fight, it can be seen and noticed what difference it makes whether one has or appoints a head of a fleet who's judicious, polite, and popular, or whether one imposes on the men a head who is unloved, despised by the men, and unsavoury to them. Vice Admiral de Witt is, we all know, this, an excellent soldier and bold sailor, who fears no danger nor even death itself. Likewise, Commodore Reut is audacious and a fearless hero, who would not hesitate to engage the worst of enemies, heeding no danger. Notwithstanding all this, we also know that Admiral Tromp possesses all these same qualities, and besides his uncommon virtues of being extraordinarily careful, God-fearing, and virtuous man, who does not call his men dogs, devils, or devil's brood, but children, friends, comrades, and similar loving and endearing words to address them with, by which he is so much endears those serving under him, they, as they say, would go through fire for him and risk their lives. Yes, by manner of speech, would not hesitate to fight the devil. If such a loved and respected head is then kept from the fleet and replaced by those who displease the men, now it's shown what calamity and disaster this brings with it. Now, let's be honest, this is a well-organised campaign by the Orangists to make sure their man is back in charge of the fleet, rather than the statesman, but it's also true. It's also true in a way. And on the evening of the 12th of October, when the States General learn of the defeat, they send a letter to Tromp and Johan Everson asking them to return and basically offering them everything they've asked for and remove the whiff from command. What's interesting at this point is if the Commonwealth had concentrated its fleet and had started to impose a blockade and a strong force approach, they could well have dictated terms. But by dividing their fleet, because they believe themselves so victorious, they believe the battered fleet won't come out to face them anytime soon, they set themselves up for what comes. Most importantly, I would say this victory, more than Blake's other ones already in the war, starts to give him that air of confidence and strength. You know, he fought in the Straits of Dover, but he had 25 ships. Tromp had 47, and he appears less successful. What's interesting to note is that in the Battle of Dover, we have far more accurate listings of who the commanders were of various ships. Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know. Too much. Right, Sean. He also needs to read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, or How to Win Battles for that matter. I'm not. Yeah, it's Punic. As Punic sounds like it relates to playing on words. No, it's Punic. That's good. Most of the jobs of an admiral at this point in history is being a diplomat. There is little obligation to fight for someone who isn't your direct local leader. The new model army starts to change that, but the vast majority of regiments are still based on being locally raised and led by a local dignitary or noble. True. What's interesting is the Dutch military reforms had definitely been based on Roman military practice when they were fighting the Spanish, but they lost that by this point. To an extent, and then you have the new model army, which is again based on Roman military practices as well as interpreted by them. And then they're slowly starting to get this idea. Didn't the Dutch do a movie about this 10 years ago? I remember seeing the subtitles. There is a very good Dutch movie about this. So Thompson, for me being a UK mutt and a second generation Canadian from the Netherlands, for me being a UK mutt and he a second generation Canadian, his grandmother was father Dutch. We get along surprisingly well. We've been buds for 18 years. I'm glad. Hmm. Fab, if you're going to abandon a ship, why not set it on fire or similar? I think the English felt that the second one they got on to the Dutch was already going to sink, so frankly they weren't bothering. Michael de Rutier, Admiral in non-Dutch pronunciations. Yeah, thank you. Shumack, you can be a jerk if you win. Winterfield Scott is forgiven for his arrogance. McClellan is not. That is true. And Trump is arrogant. All of these admirals are arrogant, but they win. De Ruyter wins. Trump wins. You are unlikely to become an admiral if you're not arrogant, to a lesser or greater extent. Because, ultimately, you're always going to need a certain section of arrogance. And this sometimes causes me trouble when I say this, because you meet people who go, but I am a humble and good person. Especially when I say this to fellow university lecturers. My profession stands up in front of hundreds of people, well, very bright, intelligent young adults, and explains history or facts or figures to them, etc. Basically, we're saying, we know this stuff, you don't, learn it from us and listen to us. It's facts, it's argument, styles of argument, it's the chains of logic, it's all those things we're teaching, but that is what we're doing. When I get colleagues, I always say you need to be so arrogant because you need to believe, before you can do that you do know this stuff well enough to teach that. And that's a level of arrogance, because we also know we know as much as we do, but we know I am a naval historian, I study all this stuff. But there's the area I've done my PhD in, which I know backwards, forwards, sideways, all sorts of ways. But then there's the areas I teach, which is a far broader spectrum, and there's the areas I do work on, far, far broader spectrum than what I've done my PhD research on and what I've done my doctorate in. So there is a level of arrogance there that I'm transposing my knowledge and my expertise across these areas, and I'm studying them and making sure. It's the same with being an admiral. It's the same with being an officer of any rank. You are, to an extent, arrogant because you are making decisions. And if you think about that, here's the most... you've got NCOs, which might have 20 years' worth of experience. But technically, an officer who's just graduated can give from Sandhurst is able to give them in orders. Now, you and I will all know that the subaltern who tries to tell the regimental sergeant major what to do will probably find their life becomes immeasurably shorter, but they theoretically have that power. It's arrogance. You need to have a level of arrogance to command. You need to have a level of self-confidence to command, because you are having to bet other people's lives. You are having to trust your decision over keep listening to other people's, because if you keep listening to other people's opinions, you never make a decision, your fleet doesn't do anything, you get sunk. So arrogance is necessary. When you win, you're called great. When you lose, you get made fun of. And Sturt Squid has pointed out, and if you set a ship on you're abandoning on fire, it could easily crash into another of your ships that is unlikely to sink and set that on fire too. Fire on one ship is bad at times. Walter 92, 8 million budget, and the stunt doubles were Dutch Marines. That's always good. Ah, the Battle of Dungeness. Now, the Battle of Dungeness is actually the battle which takes place directly after. And this takes place in the 30th of November, 1652. So, or rather, the 10th of December in the Gregorian calendar. So if we think about that in the Gregorian calendar, so I've got the Julian calendar date up there, but 10th of December in the Gregorian calendar. So if we think these things through, it takes place in, well, roughly 2 months later. And this is a battle between Martin Tromp and Robert Blake. And Tromp brings 73 warships and some fireships, though not all of them are able to take part. And Robert Blake has 37 warships. He loses 5 ships. He has 2 captured and 3 more 3 sunk. And it is a very problematic battle. One of the issues that the English fleet have is that in part of Blake's force consisted of impressed merchant vessels that retained their civilian captains and owners, and many of them refused to participate in the battle. Some naval captains insisted on their traditional right to enter and lead the battles at times of their choosing, and to leave formation in order to secure a prize. And at this point, that's when the Lord HMS Admiralty are persuaded to issue what becomes the sailing and fighting instructions, which give the Admiral far more control. There is one thing I'm going to point out. There is occasionally a myth of history which goes around, which is the idea that Tromp attached the broom to his mast as a sign that he'd swept the seas clean of his enemies. I don't think he would have done. For 3 reasons. 1, that's very out of character for Tromp. 2, there are no contemporary accounts of it. And 3, traditionally at this time in Netherlands, if you attach a broom to your mast of your ship, you're saying it's for sale. And I don't think Tromp would be wanting to sell it. Also, please let's consider the fleet which the Royal Navy has at the Battle of Dungeness. They have Triumph, Victory, both 60 gunships, Vanguard, 58 gunship, Fairfax, 56, Speaker, 54. The vessels, the Anthony Bonaventure is one of the ones which are captured. So is the Garland, 44. It's a case of there is really not the full strength of the Royal Navy of the English fleet because they've sent such a big squadron. But more importantly, it's not their big ships. There's no Royal Sovereign. There's no Prince Royal, or as she's called at this point, there's no Sovereign and Resolution. All the big ships have, after the Battle of Kentish Knock and the other sailings, are having to be repaired, maintained. So the Dutch are fighting the English when they haven't got their big ships and they haven't got their full fleet. And they win. But they don't win as well. I would say with both these battles, the Kentish Knock and the Battle of Dungeness, neither side wins as well as they should do. Steph Thompson, if the Kings kick off again, is the Iron trained in capturing ships anymore? They do have various boarding teams trained, and Royal Marines aboard. Shumack, even humble Grant wanted to create a rank so you'd have a higher rank than George Washington. See much. I think the sailors in those days thought their ship as home would psychologically resist burning it. True. Dirk Scott, a second lieutenant who doesn't listen to the senior sergeant is likely to be a bad field officer, and they'll likely be reassigned to a desk somewhere fairly quickly. True. They'll find a way to get rid of them. But it's a battle, and it's one of those battles where, frankly, it takes place off the coast of Dungeness, so it's very close to where England considered not just their home waters, but to England. And this scares the English. Actually, they were lucky because originally, Tromp leaves Helvoetsluis with 88 warships and 5 fireships, escorting a convoy of 270 merchant vessels bound for France. And Blake was quite sensible. He tried to withdraw and avoid a fight, and he did force it to be far more of a running action than probably Tromp or anyone else wanted. And it's quite useful for Tromp that John Everson had come back, because he would help out at various points in the battle when Tromp gets in trouble. Lucky for him, he has a good admiral. Tony 3434. How I know, in 20th century, to be honest, you had a broom in the mast to signify you were cleaning house. You defeated the enemy in your ships. You have all sorts of fun with brooms, but brooms are far more, as a signal that, are far more a later invention than they were of Tromp's time period. Ooh, I've just realised. Next to the iron brew bottle, which is here, there appears to be a floating subscribe button. I haven't realised that was working before, but it must be working on a few ones, but I just haven't noticed it. Cool. Let's see. Subs did it to note an entire convoy sunk. Subs did it to denote that they had scored hits with had fired all their torpedoes and sunk, and every torpedo had hit. Anyway, let's go on to the next battle. The Battle of Leghorn, which is, of course, what had been sent around. You know, it was to save the ships in Leghorn that the fleet had been sent. '09. So this is why Blake's advantage and numbers are sacrificed to try and save the fleet that's pinned in there. But the trouble is, it doesn't work. In 1652, this is of course the year prior to this, after the defeat of the Battle of Kentish, the Commonwealth believed that basically, as I've said repeatedly, the United Provinces, the Dutch, wouldn't bring out their fleet so late in the season again. So they split their fleet between the Mediterranean home waters. These have defeated the Battle of Dungeness, but it also means the situation that the fleet that's supposed to get to Mediterranean. They're sending a squadron under Richard Bailey to assist Henry Appleton. Henry Appleton's got 6 ships, including 4 hired merchantmen, that's trapped in Leghorn by a blockading Dutch fleet of 16 ships. Richard Bailey's got 8 ships and was at Alba. The aim for the English was to try and combine their forces, but Appleton sailed too soon. He sailed prematurely. Bailey couldn't come up and help, and so 3 of his ships are captured. This gave the Dutch the command of the Mediterranean and placing England's trade with the Levant at their mercenary. The Dutch commander Van Galen was mortally wounded and died on the 13th of March. Interestingly enough, one of the Dutch captains at the battle was Cornelius Tromp, Martin Tromp's son. So wherever you go, there's a Tromp. They don't manage to do much. There are 2 more battles after this. The battles of Gabbard and the Battle of Scheveningen. Which are June and August 1653. So at this point, the Dutch think we're winning this war. You know, we've just had the Battle of Leghorn, the Battle of Gabbard, the Battle of Portland, the Battle of Dungeness, Leghorn. We are winning this. We are doing well. And whilst the Battle of Portland, which had been another one, where the English had, the Commonwealth had won, 80 ships versus 80 ships with Robert Blake and Richard Dean in charge of the English. The Dutch had lost 12 ships, but they were coming back strong. They felt strong. They felt capable. Gabbard? Well, this takes place in June 1653. And at this point, the English have a fleet of roughly 100 ships, which has George Monk, Richard Dean, as well as Admirals John Lawson and William Penn there. So it has 2 generals at sea and 2 admirals, 2 of the admirals there. And the Dutch had 98 ships under Martin Tromp and Vice Admiral de Witt. Yes, he came back. Divided into the Dutch fleet was divided into 5 squadrons. They decide to attack the English, but are beaten back by the line of battle tactics which the English employ, paying a very high price for their attempt to board. And this is Gabbard. The English are then on the 3rd of June joined by Admiral Robert Blake with even more ships. Tromp decides to try again, despite his ships being practically out of ammunition. However, there's a lull in the wind. His ships are sitting ducks for English guns. And, well, they end up losing 11 ships captured, 6 ships sunk, and it's really not good. It was... basically one of the worst defeats in Dutch naval history, with the exception of a couple of other battles, including well, I'd say Camperdown and Lowestoft, but some people argue just Lowestoft. I'd say Camperdown was percentage-wise just as dangerous a loss. After this battle, and after the Battle of Gabbard, the English impose a blockade on the Dutch coast. This leads to the Battle of Scheveningen, which is the Dutch attempt to break the blockade. And this time, it is pretty much 120 warships under the command of George Monk and 127 warships under Martin Tromp. There is a humongous battle. Absolutely colossal battle. Tromp is killed early in the fight. So it's always described by a sharpshooter, but honestly, there's no such thing as sharpshooters in this period. There's a lucky shot. It's a musket. Those are not the most accurate weapons in the world in the first place, let alone when you're on a ship which is doing that in the middle of smoke and everything. It's just, And his death is kept secret to try and keep the Dutch morale up, but they lost between 14 and 30 ships. It depends on whether you count the ships which never sail again but manage to get home. The English lose 2 ships, but are sufficiently damaged that they have to return to port to refit and are unable to maintain the blockade. So basically, you have the Battle of Gabbard, which allows the English to impose a blockade, and Scheveningen, which stops the blockade. And at this point, the two sides start to work out a peace treaty, which is probably sensible, because at this point they start to realize they are beating the out of each other, and neither side's going to win. But it would have been interesting if it had carried on, because the way things were going, both the English fleet and the Dutch fleet were just going to keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And they would have grown bigger and bigger and bigger. So, turning 343. Oh god, you tried to pronounce Scheveningen and it came out like that. I tried my best. Scheveningen. Scheveningen. Sorry. I didn't try. The G thing may be best done as a CH in Elkling. So Schengenfrack? Schwengen? I think I'm making it worse. Is he improved? I don't know. Oh, okay, right. And fact, interesting that so many battles off right off the English coast versus off the Dutch one. Well, that's because that's where the Dutch convoys go. They go past the English coast. It's great. I do know turning 3-4 is upset with me. Al, that is why we aren't over 20,000 subscribers. Is that's my pronunciation of the Dutch? Possibly. I do apologize to everyone. Scheveningen. Scheveningen? Scheveningen? Oh. I could be. I could go with the Battle of Ter Heijst, which is the other name for it. Ter Heijst. But it's the battle where Tromp dies. And please note, the reason of the differences between the calendars is because the English history dates are recorded in the Julian in this period, and the Netherlands are recorded in the Gregorian. But we are now, the British are now on the Gregorian from memory. So we eventually got there. Life happens. Yeah. Right. 9683. Given the stuff never built by the UK in the 20th century, was there any unbuilt stuff from the Age of Sail? Lots of stuff. Turning 343, and I'm saying it, I didn't even recognize it at all when Scheveningen was first dropped. John Evans, when did the Dutch cease to be a major power? Probably by about the Third Anglo-Dutch War, but they still count. They're still a pretty powerful maritime nation. They just stopped being top 2 or 3. They go down to 4th or 5th. And the other ones are the British, the Spanish, and the French. The good doctors are taking Dutch words and beheading them. Mm-hmm. This is turning into butchering. I'm sorry. Turning people, if that's Den Haag, it's not doing any better. No, it's not Den Haag. It's Den Haag. Den Haag. Ter Haag is. There you go. I just looked up quickly because you were upset, and I just looked up and went, that's another option. That's the other one I'm trying to pronounce. Knight 6831. Full on question. Got any favorite unbuilt stuff from the Age of Sail? It would have been interesting to see how some of the later Age of Sail ships which were being built when the Napoleonic Wars came to an end would have turned out. Especially some of the ships of the line. The English had plans for the British had plans for some very big ships of the line. Anyway. Admin. There you go. Right. That's good. You have to learn to be more continental in your overthrow of the Dutch language. Demonstrated. We zullen uns not overgiven. Huzzah! Really? Well, how is it almost 10 p.m. your time, Doctor? It is. It is. It's about 7 minutes to 10. So, as said, Q&A till the Bru runs out and answering questions. And as said, if weather's good tomorrow, there will be a book review filmed. It will probably come out later in the week, but yes. For this book, you need to have a very... So this might give you a clue as to why it's a two-person book review. Distinguished. The Seppings crossbrace allow wooden ships to be twice the odd length. To an extent. It's difficult to cannibalize on language. I'm trying. Brunei. You should keep that. Now, let's see. What have we got coming up? Well, big things we've got coming up. We've got the Battle of Trafalgar on the 21st of October. That's a couple of weeks away. Soon, next week it's going to be Patreon 34. We've also got long patrols. The Battle of Havana. Yada-da-dee-da-da-da. Battle of Havana. And then we have the Trafalgar campaign, because we can get so obsessed with the Battle of Trafalgar we forget it's an entire campaign. There's lots of things going on. And this fits with my video earlier in the year on Admiral Calder. And then the Battle of Mayang, which I'm hopefully going to have pronunciations better of. I have got a friend who's been trying to coach me in pronunciations, but I do warn you, as always, yeah, I try my best. The Violet Friend ABM program could probably have worked if it had time and funding. Basically, it's not only about countering intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's very much about countering intermediate range ballistic missiles, which are a slightly easier task. And it was based in a lot of, how do I put this, existing technology. The idea, of course, was to use nuclear-armed Bloodhound Mark III, but which I'm not quite sure about, but, you know, hey-ho. Basically, it was part of the plan that was looking at moving to a silo-based Blue Streak intermediate range ballistic missile to take over the nuclear deterrent role from the VOC force. And eventually they decide that, well, Polaris makes more sense than trying to build ballistic missile silos in the UK. Which is probably sensible. But interesting enough, I think Violet Friend should have been kept on, because I think it would have been useful to have another long-range surface-to-air missile system to protect the UK, or actually having a long-range SAM system to protect the UK. Right. Here's an interesting point. HMS Blake C-99 was scrapped in 1982. Although she was in no condition to be reactivated at the time, it would have been very useful, especially for Michael Clarke, to have had that pair of 6-inch guns and that pair of 3-inch guns and the other systems, and of course the command space and the helicopter hangar and the flight deck in San Carlos Bay. So that's quite a big loss to the Royal Navy. It would have been useful to have HMS Blake there. I think Dr. Clarke does an excellent attempt at brutally murdering Dutch language. Like he spends extra effort to twist the dagger around. I don't. I try to do it as best as I can. I actually, with this one today, and honestly can say this, I had Google Translate playing the Dutch words to me, and I was trying to learn them all. But I think I've got a few of them confused in my own head. Secondary, would a battleship or battlecruiser ever use their main battery against wooden ships? I think Star Shells would be enough. Probably they'd use their secondaries. Let's be honest, you could probably deal with these secondaries. If you don't have secondaries, i.e. your HMS Dreadnought, and you only have primaries, you'd probably use their primaries, but, you know... I've had French, Indian, Portuguese colleagues who all were closer in their first attempts. 9683. If the Sea Vixen had got the red top Mark II and blue Dolphin SAMs, would they have improved its capability? Yes. In Massachusetts, there is a town called Worcester, pronounced Worcester, but the sauce is not produced that way. Here, it's more like Worcestershire, which makes no sense. Worcestershire. Were longbows still in use at the Battle of Kent? I think they were. Consequence, who's better, Blake, Monk, or Penn? Blake, Penn, Monk. In my opinion. Why the RN never kept a class of ships with 6-inch triple bow? It would be interesting, but it requires a lot of manning. 33434. I guess you got an audible dyslexia too. Sometimes more than that. It does seem to in some foreign languages. But also, I think it's got worse since as explained. When I was at school, the idea was that if you were dyslexic, you were already bad enough in your own language. So, especially my form of dyslexia, you shouldn't try to do foreign languages. And then, despite enjoying German and not really enjoying French because I found the French master. I liked him outside the class. In the class, I didn't like him. He was annoying in the class, but outside the class, he was perfectly reasonable. And quite interesting. I couldn't do languages anymore. That was the school ruling of the school. You know, life happens. And since that point, since about the age 13, I've found it harder to pick up languages because I didn't do them. But I try. I do make an attempt. I'm better when it's one of those sound things. I try to do it with Google. I'm not good at picking up from Google, but that's the best way. What I normally do, if I can talk to someone face to face with the language and I can hear the word pronounced face to face, me looking at the person while I'm pronouncing it, that's fine. But if it's over a computer or anything like that, then I don't pick it up as well. Colin Cameron, does HMS Blake not just look like a larger HMS Caroline? Honestly, to me, she looks like a town class which needs a decent funnel. Leave that. Leave that to one side though. It took me a time to realise it's Leicester is pronounced Leicester. I always pronounce it Leicester. Yeah. 96 What ship would have been suitable for the Sorcel lightweight sea dart? And would the Land Dart and Landwolf have been a nice system to have? They would have all been nice systems to have, and the 4-cell lightweight sea dart could have been put on pretty much any of the smaller ships. That's the whole point of it. Right. We're enjoying your Dutch pronunciations. It lightens the mood. I'm glad. So, as always, please note that they do have a competition going with my aunt if you weren't watching the beginning. And that competition is if I get to 13,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2021, she and my uncle will wear Blackburn face masks, and I will have the picture for Bru ships on the 2nd of January. So, please help. But, speaking of patrons, right then, here are the current votes. Currently on 4, and at the back, we have Carl von Gausberg's Submarine and Anti-Submarine Warfare in the Late Cold Wars and Now. On 5 votes, we have Wayne Borin's The RCN in Surface Engagements During World War II. On 6 votes, we have Ian Carr, the Naval Career of Admiral Sir William Tennant. We have Sean V, the British Navy under Cromwell, much a monk about something. And Bijan, the design and career history of the Douglas A-1 Skyrider, the US Navy's piston-powered torpedo dive bomber of the jet age. And then, all the way up on 10 votes, we have both Richard Vasava's The Naval Career of Jackie Fisher, and Bijan's The Imperial High Seas Fleet. The Tarkin replaces Tirpitz and Thrawn replaces Shear at Jutland. And steaming ahead on 13 votes, it's Paul from Chicago's Interwar Royal Navy Logistics, the Good, the Bad, and the Singapore. So, that is the current position of those. Link to Patreon down below. Vote is still going to be live till Sunday. If you would like to change the results, plenty of votes are still available to be cast. AdFab, with Radican and CDS, do we now finally have 2 RN full admirals? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if there is an RA. He will be a full admiral, and there will be a full admiral's Third Sea Lord. So yes, we will have 2 at the same time. Usually we have a couple wandering around. Usually there's one in a NATO posting somewhere. 96831. What ship would have been able to use the surface-launched long-range Seagull anti-ship missile? Again, you'd have had to fit it, but it probably could have been capable of being launched from the Type 22s if they decided to fit it to them, the Vexor sets, and it more than likely could have been capable of being fitted to the Type 82. Con Camera, for some odd reason, my school only let you learn German if you were good in French and continue to learn it as well, despite the completely different structure. That really doesn't make sense. They are completely different. I preferred Latin to French. I could do Latin quite well. French, I was terrible at. Thank you, Bijan. Enjoyed listening today. It's very kind of you. Super chats, always very kind of you. The people who join Patreon, very kind of you. And as I said, I don't expect anyone to do these things. I just find it very, very nice that you do. Because, honestly, it's giving me a lot of fun when talking to colleagues about research funding, and they're going, how are you paying for your books, and how are you doing this? And I'm going, well, I do YouTube videos, and I have very, very nice people on there. It makes me not go bankrupt, and it allows me to actually do my research. It's brilliant. Take care, John Shea. Knight 683. The Martel had a submarine launch version called the Submartel. Too much. Come on, otherwise, who would sign up for French? That might well be it. Might be the German teacher is more popular. Down him. Those of you objecting to pronunciations may enjoy a subthread on Discord's What If All History part about what ships should really be called based on tribals. I think they're more likely to enjoy the subthread currently going on how, what languages can Dr. Clarke mangle next. George Newman, once again, I'm going to have to rewatch the video later. Oh well. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much, everyone. Please do go vote in the Patreon votes if you want to. I have to admit, I am currently looking at it and trying to work out because, as you all remember, and if I put this up, and I'm just doing this because I'm explaining this one. Mm-hmm. No, that's the wrong one. Yeah. So, the point is, and I'm going to say this now, if we do have a scenario whereby... Hello. If I take this to this, and put this to his, and talk smartly. Right, if we end up with a scenario whereby you end up with a pair getting joint second place again, then currently, as you see, I've got Patreon 34 and Patreon 35 aimed up. But what I will do is I will shift one of the Bru ships' lives to the second topic again. So that's the thing. If there's currently only 2 scheduled patrons for next month for this month, but if there is a joint second place, if that does happen again, I will shift one of the Bru ships around as I've done previously and make a third one. So that's basically explaining what that's going to be doing. But as you can see, at the moment, the current votes are, well, the votes are Bijan and Richard Vasava are both level pegging it on 10 for second place. But more votes might change that. Who knows? There might actually be some people, and I have to admit, I was rooting myself for the RCN at one point because I was thinking that could be quite fun. But there's also Sir William Tennant, which is pretty cool, and the British Navy under Cromwell, which does rather fit with today's topic. But as always, it's patron choice, and it's up to you. Take care, Sarah. Take care, George Newman. DJ40. Right. I better head in because I think I can. I've heard the woofing noise of Papa. It's time to come in and put us to bed. Oh, you want me to? Actually, I get quite good at the Spanish usually. Knights current. The British had the Menace, an atomic surface-to-surface missile with a 7,000-pound nuclear warhead. So was the Cold War completely insane on weapons? It is pretty much insane. Basically, if you can justify it, you can build it. And in the Cold War, you can justify a lot because there's always a presume of what does the enemy have. Colin Cameron, I like to think of the streams as being like the original colleges, where students would wander in and listen to a lecturer because it's something they want to know and enjoy. That's what I like to treat the live streams as. Broadly speaking, they are seminars where I treat them as public seminars, open lectures, where people can wander in and choose to take part. Dan Freeman, you didn't actually have to set up, but okay, you set up their link. It's going to be fun. Right then. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Hope you enjoyed. And yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Take care, Dan Freeman. Take care, Stafford Thompson. Thank you, State of Night 6831. Thank you, Steve Winish. Thank you, Rick Gasava. Sorry, turning 3434 for butchering Dutch. Thank you, DGV40. Thank you, George Newman and Bill Bolton. Thank you, Jess P, for being here. Thank you, Anuk. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Thank you, everyone who's been here and been taking away. Thank you, Bijran. Thank you, New IQB472 and John Shea and Constant Drowsiness, AdFab, thank you. Carl Gasberg, thank you. Seneca Nero, thank you. Basically, thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed giving it. Fine. Take care, everyone. Take care, Greg Starsky. Thank you, Nanook. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Take care. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for your support. Thank you very much for watching. And please keep sharing, keep liking, and keep talking about it because, one, I like to talk to more people, and two, I really want the family bragging rights. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Walt92. I forgot to say good. Thank you earlier. Thank you. Take care.